Hello friends, welcome to Universe of Naruto X. If you love Naruto what if stories and anime explanations, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Now let's begin today's story. What was a shinobi indeed? Glorified mercenaries, silent assassins, murderers. Perhaps he was thinking too deep about the question. After all, what would a young child truly understand about the intricacies of being a shinobi? The duties a ninja had to their village outweighed personal desires. Every day a shinobi was expected to perform at 110%. There was no room for error when on the field. Here to the third Hokage of Konoha, shifted slightly in his seat. The chair producing a slight creaking noise due to the years upon years of usage. Old wizened brown eyes stared into a unique set of heterochromatic eyes that displayed an unusual amount of intelligence in them. A bright cerulean orb in his left and a dark violet in the right. A mane of unruly spiky blonde hair framed the boy's face with three jagged whisker-like birthmarks on his cheeks. A young Naruto Uzumaki, no older than 10 years old. Gingariki of the strongest Buju in the elemental nations. The legendary nine-tailed fox. A walking catastrophe would best describe the creature. I continued to stare at the boy whose eyes were alight with amusement. It was something that always made the elderly man uncomfortable to an extent. The blonde boy always seemed to carry himself with far more maturity than usual. His assumed it was due to his lineage, but he had learned to trust his gut. It was what kept him alive throughout the years. The boy's expression was one of innocent curiosity, but the third Hokage knew better. A shinobi is someone who puts the needs of their village above all else. An individual who protects their village to their dying breath. A small smile formed on the boy's face as his head tilted. What if they don't do that? The old war veteran closed his eyes as his hands clasped together on his personal desk. Then they are not a true shinobi. The young boy responded with a dismissive hum as he made his way towards the giant window of the office. His mismatched eyes gazed upon the various homes beneath the building. The boy's gaze eventually settled on his reflection as he stared at his unique pupils. I don't want to be a shinobi. Had he been a lesser man, he would have recoiled at the statement. Most children wanted to be shinobi when they reached of age to enter the academy. When wars broke out, children were usually forced into it. A broken system, yes, but an effective one. Oh. And why is that? Nah. Those eerie mismatched eyes settled on Herzan's reflection as a small grin settled on his face. I don't really care about Konoha. The elderly shinobi was silent for several moments as he processed the answer. The boy had an outgoing personality when it came to the public eye, but his personal watchers would say otherwise when in private and alone. Naruto was one of the rare individuals in the world that could portray themselves in a manner that only they wanted you to see. A rare feat considering shinobi were forced to always look beyond the norm. What do you care about? Nah. Hirozen stared directly at the boy who returned his gaze. The young blonde shifted on the balls of his heels as he clasped his hands behind his back. The boy's smile grew in size as he responded, I care about myself. The older male frowned minutely at the response of his ward. Surely there must be something you care about other than yourself. The blonde shook his head before shifting his body towards the older man. Nope. Why should I? Blonde locks bounced as the boy tilted his head. A glint of something flashed in those hauntingly mismatched eyes before disappearing. It was gone before Herzan could truly analyze it. Some would call you selfish for that. The boy furrowed his eyebrows in confusion at the statement. What's that mean? It means you don't care about how others feel and only look out for yourself. The boy's smile disappeared as he stared at the man's face for several moments. The boy shrugged his shoulders before making his way towards the door of the office. Sounds like me. Hai continued to keep his gaze on the boy as he began to leave the room. As the boy was exiting the room, the third Hokage had one last parting statement for the young Uzumaki. I've enrolled you in the Shinobi Academy. You start tomorrow, 9 o'clock sharp. Don't be late. The boy paused in his action for a scant few moments before shaking his head and exiting the office without a word. Hai frowned at the reaction before sighing lowly to himself. The boy had no other choice than to be a shinobi. And if the boy grew up resenting Hiran, then so be it. For the betterment of Konoha, he would do anything. Break. Stay close to me. Ino. We have a lot of things we need to do today. A young girl with platinum blonde hair and light teal eyes shook her head and began to trail after her mother. childlike curiosity bounding through the young girl as her eyes scanned each and every object in the main
Chloe's
marketopia.
stepdad is head of
Ace
security
of
at
Konoha.
Blackwell.
What are we shopping
He
for,
wants to put
Mommy?
surveillance cameras
The mother
all
of
over the
Ino
school?
glanced down towards her daughter as she took the young girl's
Nothing.
hand
This
in
is
hers and
so
guided them
lame.
through the busy streets. A gentle smile framed the brunette's face as she responded, I'm making my special yakisoba recipe tonight, and your father is getting off early today. It's a special occasion after all. You're following in our footsteps.
Look at all that
The young
food.
girl's eyes
That's
widened
like
in
enough
joy as her
spam
body
for 100
practically
years.
vibrated. I can't wait. You make the best food, Mom. The older Yamanaka just chuckled merrily as she slowly weaved her way
Check
through
out
the
the
many
muscle
residents of
car.
Konoha.
Chloe's
The next few
stepdad must
hours
be a
passed by
gearhead.
rather quickly for the mother and daughter. The young blonde was always a step behind her mother until a small commotion drew her attention. The young girl slowed to a stop as she witnessed a young boy being yelled at by a
Cool,
random
now it's
merchant.
opened.
The young Yamanaka tilted her head curiously and began to move towards the commotion. The matriarch of the Yamanaka clan turned her head to see her daughter approaching a small crowd of villagers. A frown appeared on her face as she listened to the curses of a shopkeeper. Ino was within several feet of the commotion before a gentle hand settled on her shoulder. She jumped
Poor little
slightly at the
dear.
contact and
It's
gazed
not
over
enough
her
to kill
shoulder
you,
to
they
see
have
her
to
mother
display
staring
your
at the
head.
scene with a heavy frown. I've already told you before, you little, you're not welcome here. The young blonde child being yelled at just smiled through the insult. I said that I want the mask. The shopkeeper glared at the boy before brandishing a broom. Get away from my stand or I'll make you. Naruto's smile grew bigger at the thread as his mismatched eyes bore into the older man. You'll make me. That sounds mean. The plump shopkeeper grit his teeth as his hands tied around the wood. I'm taking the mask. Naruto's eyes remained glued to the merchant as he reached for the mask. The shopkeeper finally had enough and made to swing the broom to push the child away. The young boy's smile morphed into a small grin at the older man's reaction.
What's in those files up
The
there?
broom was halted in place by a dainty hand before being snapped in
Shit!
half a second later.
Butterfingers.
You would harm a child. Saya Yamanaka stood in front of the young Jinchuriki before twirling the
Kate
broken wood
Marsh.
from the broom in her
Why the
hand.
hell would he have pictures
Faster
of
than
her?
the man could even blink.
Okay, this is
The tip
getting
of the wood
totally
made
weird.
direct contact with the center of his forehead. And dead. It is that easy. What possesses you to even have the gall to harm an innocent child? The woman
the-
continued to stare at the man
Chloe's
who was
stepdad
practically
actually
frozen in
installed
place.
cameras in the rooms?
The man audibly gulped
For
as his
reals?
gaze shifted between the
This
woman
guy
and the
has
blonde boy.
serious trust issues.
That's not an innocent child.
Chloe and Joyce
The
even
woman
know
raised her
about this?
eyebrow before shifting her attention towards the young blonde boy who was watching the scene with a small grin. Saya studied the boy's face for several seconds before pushing the sharp piece of wood slightly forward. A small cut and a slight dribble of blood ran down the man's nose as the boy's grin grew larger. He is an innocent child. You are the one threatening a child with violence. The woman glanced
Wowzer,
towards
a
her
map of
daughter who was
Blackwell
watching the
Academy.
spectacle with wide eyes.
I wonder why.
Saya turned her attention back to the boy before motioning her other hand towards the mask he wanted. Take it, young one. I will pay for it. The young boy turned to the woman in slight surprise before a toothy grin blossomed on his face. The woman nodded with a gentle smile as the boy gazed at several different masks in the shop. S.A.'s eyes roamed across several different masks that were on display. The designs were very clean and it seemed as if they were crafted by a master. While the shop owner was most certainly a credent, he had talent at least. Naruto's mismatched eyes landed on a specific mask as he stared directly at it with a puzzled expression. The design of this particular mask was that of a fox. 3 concentric ovals encircled each eye hole. The mouth was more akin to a horizontal line that had a slight upwards dip to emphasize a slightly opened mouth. A unique design sat below the mouth that resembled the same design of the eye holes. A bold circle being surrounded by 2 ovals that overlapped
That
one
took
another.
Chloe and me the
A
whole
similar
day to
design was
draw.
placed on the forehead of the
It's
mask
almost
with the
invisible
addition of a
now.
straight line that went directly down to where the wearer's nose would be positioned. The tips of the ears were colored in an emboldened to give
We
the
made this
ears more
grade for
detail.
Chloe's kitty.
The entire porcelain
Bongo.
mask was all white with the
He never
designs
saw
being
that car
colored a deep
coming.
crimson. Na
William
stared
used
at
to
the
grow
mask for
awesome
several more
burgers for
seconds
us.
before grasping it
I
and
wonder if
placing
he
it
was
on
the
his
last one to
face.
use this.
The mask loosely held into his face due to it being too big. The boy tilted his head before moving it so that it only covered half of his face. The mask now covering his cerulean pupil. Saya stared at the mask with a narrowed gaze. What were the chances that the boy would pick the only fox-themed mask on display? She found it slightly ironic that he'd choose it. The boy's gaze found hers and a smile adorned the boy's face. The Yamanaka frowned slightly as a nod began to form in her stomach. Saya stared directly into those violet orbs before a wave of anxiety passed through her body. Her heartbeat began to quicken as her entire body tensed. Thank you, pretty lady. The matriarch of the Yamanaka almost jumped at the sound of the boy's voice, his eyes now being closed due to his toothy grin. The woman furrowed her eyebrows as her pulse began to calm down.
Joy still works at
What
Two
was
Wheels
that?
Diner.
She swallowed
Best
slightly
damn
before
burgers in
glancing
Arcadia.
towards the shop
I
owner
better
who
get
was
one
now
soon.
resting against the back wall of his stand. When had he moved? Mommy, you still haven't paid for the mask. Sia was interrupted from her thoughts as her daughter pulled on her hand. The woman slowly exhaled
I'd
before
love to go
nodding
to
her
Paris,
head.
too.
She set the money on the stand
At this
before
rate, they'll be
turning
lucky to
towards
get to
the blonde
Portland.
ginger who was now staring at Ino. Hi. I'm Na. What's your name? The young Yamanaka blushed at the boy before waving back. His eye was purple, her favorite color. They were so beautiful. I'm Ino. Ah. The girl trailed off after stuttering before shyly hiding behind her mother. Na tilted his head before walking around the older woman and staring at Ino. Why are you hiding? Ooh. Are we playing hide and seek? I've never played it before. The other kids don't like me. They always stay away from me. The boy trailed off in sadness after his statement. Saya frowned at the boy's tone before glancing towards her daughter and gently nudging her for encouragement. The girl slowly stood in front of the boy before giving him a shy smile. I'll play with you, Na. The boy's head snapped towards the young blonde in surprise. Really? You want to play? The girl nodded at the question as a smile morphed onto his face. Cool. My first friend. Saya stared at the interaction between the two children with a keen eye. There was something in the boy's gaze that caused an uncomfortable feeling to settle in the pits of her stomach. His eyes were far too sharp for his age. There was too much intelligence in them. She must be paranoid. Yes, Na was a gingery, but there wasn't anything necessarily wrong with the boy. A little boisterous for sure, but nothing too abnormal. Saya shook her head before gaining the duo's attention. Would you like to join us, Na? Ino and I are just finishing up our shopping. I'll take both of you to the park afterwards. Ino grinned at her mother's statement before nodding her head. The blonde boy stared at Sia for several seconds before nodding his head, causing his mask to bobble slightly at the action. The woman smiled softly at the boy before holding out both of her hands for the children to take. Her daughter immediately latched onto her left as the boy remained rooted in place. Saya raised an eyebrow at the boy who was staring at the appendage with apprehension. What's wrong, Nada? I have to hold your hand. The woman frowned at his response before slowly shaking her head. You don't have to if you don't want to, dear. The blonde child nodded his head before moving closer to the woman and standing just out of reach. Sia pursed her lips for several seconds before sighing lowly. Break. You can't do that, Nah. That's cheating. Ino stomped her foot in frustration as she glared at her new friend who was sitting in a tree, laughing. Get down here, Don't make me come up there. The girl raised her fist in the air and waved it threateningly. The blonde boy swung his legs idly before tilting his head with a smile. And how are y'all going to do that? You can't use chakra. The boy grinned as Ino huffed in annoyance. Ino didn't understand how Naruto was able to climb the tree with chakra. He was the same age as her. Her parents hadn't even started her training. How come you know how to use chakra? That's not fair. The boy tilted his head and gripped his chin with his right hand. Because I'm special, the girl gave an agitated growl at the response before plopping herself down and resting her back against the tree. The young Yamanaka proceeded to cross her arms and pout. Ah. Come on, Enoch-chan. There's no need to pout. The girl gave a HMP sound and turned her head away as the boy laughed. Na stared down at his new friend before jumping off the large branch he was sat atop of. The boy landed without a sound as he placed his hands in his pockets and smiling at Ino. The girl peeked a single eye open before giggling. Why are you laughing? The boy began to pat his chest and pants as he looked himself over. Something on my face. The girl began to giggle more as a small smile formed on Naruto's face. The boy sat down beside his new friend as the two began to laugh together. Saya watched the two children with a narrowed gaze. Her eyes traveled up towards the position that the young Uzumaki had jumped off from. 15 feet. The woman shifted in her seated position and rested her cheek on her knuckles. The boy not only landed with little effort, but he also climbed the entire way up with chakra. How he learned to control his chakra to such a degree was astounding. He was a Ginryuki with an unprecedented amount of chakra flowing through his body. To have such finite control of it at such a young age. Who had taught him? The woman stared at the ground as she closed her eyes. She had heard rumors through the grapevine about him. She, like a normal person, ignored them. Rumors were just that, rumors. For what reason would she entertain them? According to Anko Midarashi, the boy didn't even want to be a shinobi. If that was the case, then why would he go out of his way to control his chakra? It didn't truly make sense. Sai knew that Hirozen would force the boy to become a shinobi whether he wanted to or not. Personally, she disliked the notion. Na didn't get a choice in becoming a Ginryuki. It was something out of his control. And now there was another thing in his life that he had no control over. He would come to hate this village if it persisted. The woman was unaware of what was about to transpire regarding the young boy she was thinking about. Na stared at two boys who stood half a foot taller than him. He raised his visible eyebrow at the boys before smiling at them. You two look angry. The boy's smile grew as the two 12-year-olds glared at the boy. Ino frowned at the looks before gripping Naruto's arm in worry. Beat it, Blondie. We want to talk to the brat here. Ino frowned at the boy before directing a small glare at him. And if I don't? The boy sneered at her as he responded. Then you'll get hurt, too. Don't threaten Ino again. Na stood directly in front of the boy with a small smile adorned on his face. The two boys recoiled slightly as the boy practically appeared in front of them. The Gingari tilted his head at them before grinning. You two look scared. What's wrong? Didn't you want to talk? The two boys frowned at the question before glancing towards each other. The shorter boy glared at the young blonde before placing his hand against Naruto's chest and pushing him backward. The only one who should be scared here is you. Naruto's back collided with the tree as Ino shot to her feet. Hey, don't push my friend like that. The taller boy glared at her before raising his hand as if he was going to strike her. Before his hand could touch the girl, it was stopped by Na. The blonde Ginryuki stared at the boy with a blank expression before slowly twisting his wrist. The boy began to grimace and tried to pull away from the masked boy. His teeth began to grit in pain as his knees buckled. Ah, that hurts. Stop. Na tilted his head at the request before a small smile morphed on his face. If you say so. Na, in a burst of speed, completely rotated the boy's wrist before grabbing the appendage with his other hand and twisting it the opposite direction he was twisting it. The blonde child then jerked the appendage downwards and let go of the boy's hand. The tall boy screamed in pain as he cradled his broken wrist. The boy's scream alerted several individuals, including Ino's mother, who began to make her way towards the childer. She watched with widened eyes as Naruto rotated his hips, shifted his lower body and proceeded to kick the down boy right across his face. The boy's head instantly snapped backwards as a fountain of blood shot out from the boy's mouth. The boy's head slammed against the earth with a booming thud as blood poured down his face. Na continued to stare at the down boy with a small smile before shifting his attention to the other boy just slightly out of arm's reach. The blonde clenched his fist and took a single step towards the other kid. Before he could take another step, Saya intervened between the two and gently placed her hand on Naruto's shoulder to prevent his advance. The woman's light brown eyes analyzed the child who was clearly unconscious. Her eyes trailed down his arm to the very noticeable fractured wrist. It would be at least 8 weeks before the boy could use his hand again. Her eyes trailed upwards towards the boy's broken nose that was steadily dripping blood. Saya turned her head towards the young Ginryuki whose head was tilted with a small smile. It seemed the boy also knew how to augment his body with chakra as well. That kick was particularly brutal for a young boy no older than 10. Several parents and other adults began to crowd the scene to get a better look at child. A shrill cry resonated through the crowd as Sia spotted the boy's mother. Who else would scream like that? The plunk woman pushed several men and women aside as she reached her child and began to try to assess the situation. Her eyes rapidly scanned over everyone before landing on Na. A nasty glare formed on her face as she made to grab the boy's shirt. Sierra Yidley gripped the woman's hand before turning her attention to Na. Why did you hurt him? His violet orb settled on her face before rocking on the balls of his heels. He hit Ino. The woman stared directly into the boy's single visible orb. For several seconds, she remained fixated on his eyes before glancing towards her daughter.
I need to go to my
Is
room
this
and
true, my
return
little
Warren's flash
flower?
drive.
The young Yamanaka glanced towards her new friend before meekly nodding her head. Saya scrutinized both children for several seconds before nodding her head. She gently gripped Naruto's shoulder before crouching
look,
down and
it's Max
facing him.
Caulfield,
Try to
the
be more
selfie
gentle
hoe
next
black one.
time. Okay. Not every child
What
is
a
able to
lame
use
gimmick.
chakra like you
Even
can.
Mark,
You
Mr.
can hurt
Jefferson,
someone very
falls for your
badly.
wave hipster
The young
bullshit.
boy nodded his head rapidly before placing his
Hegarian
index and middle
process,
finger
sir.
above his
You
brow
could
in a mock
barely even
salute.
say that.
You got
I guess
it,
you got your
pretty
meds
lady.
filled.
His violet orb shut as he gave her a toothy grin. That's it. You can hurt someone. Are you
Since
daft?
you know all
He
the
assaulted my
answers,
child.
I guess you have
Look
to
at
find
his
another way
condition.
into the
The
dorm.
plunk woman
We
glared
ain't
fiercely
moving.
at the matriarch of the Yamanaka.
Oh, wait.
Your child
Hold
placed
that
his
pose.
hands on my child. Saya stood to her full height before gently
So
pulling
original.
Naruto's head into her hip
Don't
like
worry,
a mother
Max.
wolf.
I'll put a vintage
The
filter on
little
it right
Na
before I
here
post
protected
it
my
all over
daughter.
social
A
media.
cold smile
Now,
blossomed on
why don't you
Saya's
go
face
fuck
that caused a
yourself,
shiver to rack the woman's
Oh
spine.
yes, Victoria.
If you
I'll
knew
get
how
your
to
bony
properly
ass out of
raise
my
your
way.
son, we wouldn't be in this situation. The woman recoiled in shock before standing over her child and pointing towards Na. That you protect that thing. Ino frowned at the harsh words before stepping beside Naruto and pulling his arm towards her body. Don't talk about Naruto like that. He isn't a thing. The young Gingariki alternated his gaze between the woman who was practically shielding him from harm and his new friend. His lips parted in genuine surprise at the fact that both were protecting him so fiercely despite only knowing him for a coup. Lure of ours. You are a bigot. A sad, miserable bigot. Saya slight bent her knee before grasping Naruto's hand and gently tugging him as she started to walk away from the crowd. The young boy made no effort to resist and allowed himself to be pulled by Ino's mother as the girl followed suit with her. Mother and new friend. That little demon will be the end of all of us. You protect what you don't understand. Hell kill us all. You're a fool. The woman was cut off as a shinobi in a mask silenced her with a chop to the neck. Several other masked shinobi appeared in the area and began to move people along. The Anu member who silenced the woman glanced at the retreating Yamanakas before looking over the injured child. The purple-haired woman picked the child up, made a single gesture with her hand, and disappeared. Another Ambu member picked the woman up before disappearing right after. Don't listen to her words. Nah. You aren't what they say. Saya glanced towards the boy who sported a small smile despite the harsh insults that were thrown at him. She was angry. The boy's tone was full of amusement, and Sia raises an eyebrow at the odd reaction. Na was proving to be an incredibly difficult child to read. Most children, even those in clans, were easy to understand. It wasn't particularly what he was saying. It was
Sorry,
how he was
no
saying it.
paparazzi allowed.
The boy reminded her of a certain Uchiha prodigy in the village.
Think, Max.
Where are we going,
Rewind
pretty
and
lady?
find something.
The boy's mask shifted on his face as he turned his gaze towards the woman. Saya smiled down at the boy as she responded to my home. Would you like to join us? Nah. I'm making a special dish. The boy blinked several times before nodding his head. Yay. You're going to love it. Nah. Mommy makes the best food ever. Ino pumped her fist with
I
a
must
small
have missed
cheer as the
something.
boy smiled at her
I should
outburst.
rewind.
I'm sure she does. Break. Mismatched pupils stared at a plate full of food in slight confusion. The blonde picked up one of the utensils before
Sorry,
poking the food.
no paparazzi allowed.
What is this pretty lady? Saya paused in her eating before swallowing her food. It's called yakisoba narat. They are noodles that have
Do you
been
understand
stir-fried.
English?
Why don't you
Get
try
lost.
some? The woman gently pushed his plate closer to him as he furrowed his eyebrows. Ino and Enonoi stared at the
None
boy as
shall
he slowly
pass.
gathered some
Capiche?
noodles with his chopsticks before eating the meal. His eyes grew wide before practically shoveling the food down his throat. Saya began to laugh merrily at the boy's reaction. The blonde boy paused in his actions before giving the woman a grin. This is so good. Saya smiled softly at the boy as he turned his attention back towards his food. He stared at the food for several seconds before a small frown marred his face. I've never had a meal like this. The woman's eyes softened at the boy as she glanced towards her husband. Enaki nodded his head slightly before taking a sip of his wine. You've never had yakisoba before, I take it. The woman's mouth dipped into a frown as the boy's eyes glimmered in sadness. I've never had someone cook a meal for me. Silence reigned in the dining room for several moments following the boy's statement. A knot formed in Sia's stomach as her heart lurched. Too often of times did people take for granted the little things in their life. A home-cooked meal
I
being
must
one
have
of
missed
those
something.
things. Well,
I should
if you
rewind.
keep coming over, then you'll get to taste more of Mommy's cooking. Ino exclaimed with a small smile before taking a gulp of her juice. A gentle smile formed on Sia's face at the words of her daughter. Narut blinked in surprise at the girl's words before glancing towards the two adults in the room. Enaki shrugged lightly before gesturing with his head towards his wife. If it's all right with Sia, then I don't have a problem with it. The boy's mismatched
Sorry,
eyes landed
no
in Sai, who
paparazzi
nodded
allowed.
her head at the boy. The sheer happiness radiating from the boy was palpable. This small act of kindness would forever be cherished in the young Gingariki's heart. Break. Are you sure you don't want to stay for the night? Nah. It's really not a problem.
Okay,
Na
let's
placed the
see if
mask
this
that Saya
works.
had bought for him on the side of his head before smiling at her. She was flanked by her husband while Ino stood in front of the couple. It's okay, pretty lady. He sketched a small bow towards the family before placing his hands into his pockets. Thank you for the meal and for the mask and for sticking up for me. The boy happily trailed off with a grin as Sia smiled and shook her head. It is no problem, Na. You are welcome to come over whenever you like. The boy gave her a mock salute as Ino broke away from her parents. She shyly made her way towards the boy before giving him a hug. The boy blinked several times before returning the girl's embrace. The girl pulled away with a small blush before retreating back to her parents, who were chuckling at the adorable scene. The Gingariki smiled at the family as he began to walk away. Na made his way out of the
I need to
Yamanaka
figure this
clan
out.
compound before aimlessly walking through the village. His mind
but
ran
no
on
cigar.
autopilot as he
They have to
maneuvered
be
through the
right under
crowds.
the bucket.
After almost half an hour of walking, the boy stopped at the
Thanks
top of the
so much.
Hokage monument. A slight breeze of wind ruffled his spiky locks of blonde hair as he stared at the village. Several minutes of silence passed by before he jumped over the metal railings and landed on the stone head of the
Close,
fourth
but no
Hokage.
cigar.
Na
They have to
slowly
be
made
right
his way to the
under
edge of the
bucket.
giant stone bust before sitting down. He began to
so
idly
much
kick
for
his
almost
legs
ruining
back
my
and
outfit.
forth as he stared down at the
You're
village.
so lucky that
A
didn't fall on
sinister
us.
smile formed
We'd
on
see
his
your
face
ass
as he
so
began
fast.
to hum a soft tune. Time. So much time.
Damn,
He
I
had
missed
plenty of
something.
it. His sinister
I better
smile
rewind.
morphed into a grin before he slid his mask down to cover his entire face. There's no meaning to a flower unless it blooms. Na stood in the middle of his bathroom, staring into his reflection with a small frown. His mismatched orbs glanced down towards his sink as he stared at the mask that Enos' mother had purchased for him. Why was it so familiar to him? The second he saw the mask, something within him lurched. It was becoming frustrating. He had most definitely seen this mask before. Somewhere, somehow, he just knew it. Na reached towards the mask and slowly ran
I
his
don't wanna mess
fingers
with
over
that
the
ladder and
porcelain
hurt poor
material.
Samuel.
His index
I just
finger
want to get
traced the
Victoria
design
the
that
hell
sat on
out
the
of the
upper
way.
half of the mask before slipping towards the ovals on the right eye hole. A sigh escaped him before gripping the object and placing it against his face. Who are you? Na. The boy continued to stare into the mirror
Okay,
for the
let's
next
see if
hour and a
this
half
works.
as he contemplated the question he asked. Break. All right, class. Settle down. I know you're all excited to start your journey in becoming a
Keep
shinobi,
walking,
but
hippie.
please calm yourselves. A man with a unique scar that ran across the bridge of his
Victoria
nose
is not
requested.
getting the hint.
A small smile graced his face as the children settled down. He proceeded to lean on his desk with a clipboard in hand and began to call attendance to the
Sorry,
class.
no paparazzi
A
allowed.
majority of the major clans in Konoha had sent their heirs and heiresses, it would seem, though a large amount of the class was populated with civilian families.
Close,
Aruka
but no
doubted that
cigar.
many of them would
They
make
have
it
to
to
be right
graduation.
under the
The
bucket.
training regiments and qualifications for becoming a genin were incredibly
Thanks so
difficult,
much for almost
and most
ruining my
civilian
outfit.
families didn't have shinobi backgrounds. Aruruka idly called out several names. Some he recognized due to their clan names and others who were unknown. Though he slightly paused when he stared at a single particular name, one that made him
Close, but no
slightly
cigar.
uncomfortable.
They have to be
Natsu
right under
Makyuka
the
popped his
bucket.
head up and gazed at the
hell?
entire room full of children as he tried
Thanks
to spot
so
the
much
young
for almost
child.
ruining my outfit.
Several seconds passed
You're
by in
so
awkward
lucky that
silence
didn't
as the
fall on
student
us.
stared at
We'd
the
see
man
your
in
ass
slight
so
confusion.
fast.
The Tunin frowned before glancing back down towards the
Max.
clipboard. As he was
Rewind and
about to
find
skip the
something.
name, the door to the room opened, drawing the entire class attention. This is room 207. Right. Aruka's eyes landed on Narut, who gave him an eerie smile. The boy wore a plain black t-shirt with black cargo shorts and a pad of black sneakers. Someone clearly loved the color black. The tunin frowned lightly at the boy before motioning with his hand. "You're late, nah, you seem annoyed." His immediate response caused Aruka's frown to deepen. "There it is." Na gave the man a small grin as his gaze shifted towards the many children in class. He recognized a few of the students before landing on Ino's shocked face. His grin grew at spotting the girl before waving with his hand. "Nah, you're going to be a shinobi." The girl's shocked expression shifted to one of joy before gesturing with her hand.
Get lost.
"Come here. Sit with me." The Gingari glanced at the tunin for a scant few moments before making his way towards his friend. The boy slowly passed by several children, some of which glared at him in contempt and others who stared at him curiously due to his mask. Na reached the row of seats that Ino sat on before staring at the empty spot on her right side. His head tilted slightly before locking eyes with a young boy who sat on the aisle seat. "Move." The blonde Gingari grinned at the young boy whose eyebrows furrowed at the demand before settling on a glare. "Did you just tell me to move?" The young boy with ebony hair and charcoal eyes stared into the single violet orb of the blonde boy in front of him. Silence reigned in the class for several
That's the
seconds as
first
the
and
boys
last
stared
time I
directly
expect
at
to
each
hear
other.
that.
Ino sported a small frown at the scene and was about to speak before Na leaned his head forward. "Yes, I did. Now move. I want your seat." Black eyes narrowed at the request before responding dismissively. "Then make me move." A crooked smile formed on the ginger's face before his right hand came to rest on the desk in front of the other boy. "This is the last time I'm going to ask you before I send you through it." The ebony-haired boy finally stood up from his seat and glared viciously at the blonde. "You must not know who I am." Na smirked directly at the boy before standing to his full height as well. "Of course not, and I don't care." The blonde raised his hand and placed his index finger on the Uchiha clan insignia that rested on the jacket. "You being an Uchiha means nothing to me." Sasake immediately gripped the boy's wrist as he slung it away. Ino immediately placed herself between the two boys and gently placed her hands against Naruto's chest. The young Yamanaka did not want a repeat of what happened yesterday. Her mother had punished her for lying because of the altercation, and she didn't want another punishment due to it. Na wasn't necessarily wrong, but he wasn't right either. The other boy would have hit her had he not stopped it. "SAs, just switch seats with me." The girl glanced over her shoulder towards the Uchiha, who sneered before sitting in her seat with a dismissive scoff. The girl sighed in relief before turning back towards her friend, who continued to stare
let's
at the
see if this
Uchiha.
works.
She frowned at his expression before grabbing his hand and pulling the boy towards the seat as she sat back down. The young blonde allowed himself to be pulled by his friend before giving an amused retort. "He seems fun." The platinum blonde girl frowned at the statement before poking his chest. "Stop it." He glanced at her with a raised eyebrow before smiling. "Naruaki. Fighting between classmates is forbidden unless on the training fields." Na glanced at Aruka with a small smile before shrugging. "What if I do it anyway?" The tunin frowned at the question before crossing his arms. "You'll be punished." "That doesn't sound fun." The tunin continued to stare at the boy who returned the stare with that ever-present eerie smile. "This child." The man shook his head before continuing
Close,
to
but
call
no
off the
cigar.
names of other
They
students.
have to be right under the
Naruto's
bucket.
smile disappeared before he laid his hand on his cheek and closed his eyes. This was going to be a waste of time. The basics of the academy were just that. The basics. He already knew how to use his chakra effectively. Unless the academy
must
was
have
going
missed
to go
something.
more in depth with
I
how
should
to properly
rewind.
channel it, then he had no reason to even be here. Na sat in his position for the entirety of the class period as Aruka began to describe chakra and how it was used and produced in the body. All of which was irrelevant in the young boy's mind. Chakra allowed you to perform the jutsus and was the life force of all humans. That's it. What else do you need to know? Naruto Uzumaki. The boy was snapped out of HS daydreaming by the stern voice of his teacher who stared at him with his arms
let's see
crossed.
if this works.
SSED against his chest.
Keep walking,
The young
hippie.
blonde slowly opened his eyes and stared at the man with a small frown. "Have you been
Victoria
paying
is
any
not
attention
getting
to
the
what
hint.
I've been saying for the past 3 hours?" Na raised an eyebrow before shrugging his shoulders
Do you
uncaringly.
understand English?
"Of course not."
Get
The tunin
lost.
furrowed his eyebrows in slight annoyance before shifting in his position. "And why is that?" The class of children began to watch the interaction curiously. Na didn't respond for several seconds as he thought of how he wanted to reply. Because I already know this. This is boring. The boy shrugged his shoulders before opening his visible eye. When do we get to actually train? Haruka frowned at the boy and began to lean against his desk. That doesn't happen until year 2 of the course. Naruto scoffed at the answer before slowly standing up. This is a waste of my time. I'm leaving. Ino stared at her friend wide-eyed, who placed his hands into his pockets and made to leave the room. You can't just leave. Nah. The Chunin frowned at the boy who was slowly making his way down the small steps of the classroom where the desks rested.
Right under the
I
bucket.
can't. Then what am I doing right now? Amusement was lit in the boy's response as he made the final step down the small stairs of the classroom. He stood in front of Haruka with a small smile who frowned heavily at the action.
There's only
Sit back
one
down.
way around
Nah.
this.
The Gingari raised an eyebrow before a grin formed on his face. Naruto's violet orb bore into the older man for several seconds as he stood still. A small spike of anxiety crept through Haruka as he continued to stare at the boy. The Chunin subconsciously took a small step backwards before making direct contact with his desk. The wooden object scraped against the floor, drawing the older man's attention. Haruka quickly shifted his attention back in front of him only to notice that Naruto was nowhere to be seen. His eyebrows furrowed in confusion before glancing towards his students. The children returned his stare as Haruka tried to grasp what just happened.
Capiche?
He blinked several times before shaking his head. A small smile adorned Naruto's face as he stepped outside the academy building. That was far too easy to do. The boy made it all of 2 steps before a woman in a cat-themed Ambu mask appeared in front of him with her hands crossed over her chest. The 2 masked individuals stared at one another for an entire 2 minutes in silence. The purple-haired woman tilted her head slowly before speaking. You are being difficult again. The boy adopted a grin as his hands rested in his pockets. My time is better spent elsewhere. No continued to stare at the unique child before shifting her position. Hokage-sama ordered me to take you back should you try to skirt the academy.
Hell?
That's
Are you
mean.
kidding?
His response
Look
was
at this.
expected.
Victoria,
No knew
it's
the
just
boy
water.
far more than others.
Yeah.
She had
Water
been
on
his
my
personal
cashmere.
watcher for the
Do you
last
know how
3
much this
years.
fucking
His
outfit
mannerisms,
costs? You look
his actions,
great.
his
I can't even
words,
chill
they
on the
weren't that of a child. It was noticeable to any and all who ever interacted with the boy. Clearly, something was off about the boy, but most either ignored the child due to his condition, while others wrote it off as him expressing himself. Children were unpredictable after all. You follow the old man blindly. En-chan Yuga blinked slowly underneath her mask as the boy shifted on the balls of his heels.
Get the hell
He
away
knew that
from
she
me,
knew
weirdo.
exactly what he was trying to accomplish.
Hold
She
on,
would play
hold on.
along
We'll get
though.
some towels.
I'm a
We'll be right
shinobi.
back.
Her
So move
response
your
was
ass
immediate
before
as the
I
boy's
clap.
violet orb
It
gleamed with
worked.
amusement.
Don't mess with
Oh,
Max, bitches.
I know. Yuga and Na continued to stare at one another for another minute before the woman narrowed her eyes. He was beginning to speak a lot more nowadays. What do you believe a shinobi is? It seemed to be the right question to ask because the boy's smile increased in size. The real questions. Na
hey,
tilted his
Victoria.
head
What do you
before
want,
glancing
Max?
off towards the village. The boy was quiet for a few moments before directing his attention back on the woman. A shinobi is a dog.
Don't.
Yua's eyes narrowed at the
Don't
boy's
say
response.
a word, Max.
She knew
Hold
exactly
that
what the
pose.
boy was implying with that statement. The woman took a step towards
And
the
no
boy
filter
before
needed
crouching
before I
and
post
staring
this.
directly into his visible eye. Go back.
Now
A
please
cheeky
move.
grin
I've had a
pulled at his
messed up
features
day
as he
and I'm going
slowly
to my
raised
room.
his hand
You do
and traced
that?
the markings
I
on
know
her
where you
mask.
live.
No
So does
Kandune
Nathan.
Chan. It's boring in there. I want to have
Maybe I
fun.
shouldn't have done
Yuga
that.
allowed the boy to touch her
Now I have
mask
to
as
get
she
to my
pursed her
room, then
lips.
see Warren.
On one hand, he was absolutely correct. The academy was awful and dull. Someone like him would find no use for it. On the other hand, Hirozen had specifically ordered the boy to attend the academy. Na already knew how to use his chakra, and she doubted that learning more about it would benefit him. He was already learning subjects revolving around the application of chakra by himself. Of course, she had given him the pointers to begin with. Naruto's gentle ministrations ceased as the woman tilted her head before placing her hand atop his head. How about a deal? A small smirk formed on her face as his eyes gleamed curiously. There were few things that could entice the boy, and anything revolving around deals, agreements, and word of honors demanded his attention. I'm listening. Yugal ruffled his hair for a few moments before speaking. Finish the first month of the academy, and I'll teach you something that'll allow you to skip the academy in its entirety.
How
She
sad.
smiled as the
I
boy
didn't write
began to
anything.
grin in
I
excitement.
have nothing
I'll
to
never
say.
have to come back. Yuga's long tresses swung from side to side as she shook her head. Never again.
Home
The boy
sweet
narrowed
home,
his
my
eyes before
favorite
raising
cartoon.
his hand. Shake on it. Had she been a lesser woman, she would have snorted in amusement at the boy's actions. Yua had honor despite being a shinobi. She upheld any bargains that she made. The woman's
I look
gloved hand
so
gently
pathetic.
gripped his smaller one before dipping it
I am
down in a
so
show of
addicted to this
faith.
sight.
Have I ever
Look at
lied to
these
you
vintage
before,
people. Wine makes
Larokan?
me laugh.
That's why you're my favorite.
It's nice to feel like
NC
I already
Han.
made a real
The boy
friend here.
smiled as he let go of the woman's hand before about facing and making his way back into the academy. Yua watched the boy the entire time before disappearing. A sinister smirk morphed on the boy's face as the doors to the building shut behind him. Unexpected, but ultimately a welcomed outcome. Break. Na sighed to himself as he sat outside the academy. It had
Max
been
and
several
Chloe,
days since
best
he and
friends
Nico
forever.
had made the deal,
Who even
and
says
he was
that
slightly
anymore?
regretting it.
I'm going to
It
have
was
to
so
call Chloe
boring
eventually
here.
and find out
Na
what she'll
glanced
say.
at the brown paper
The
bag
longer
in
I
front
wait,
of
the
him as
worse
a
it'll
small
be.
glare formed on his face.
Idiot.
The boy opened his bag and pulled out a small red apple. His violet orb gazed at the fruit for several seconds before he began to squeeze it. His hand began to tremble for a few seconds before the fruit was ultimately crushed due to the boy's strength. The blonde stared at the fruit with a sense of detachment as the juices dripped from his hand. The mushed pieces of the apple slowly slipped to the ground as Naruto slowly unclenched his fist. Nah. The boy shifted his attention to Ino as the girl
Cartier
made her way
Bresson,
towards his
Renault,
table.
Hamilton,
He immediately
the
wiped his
greatest.
hands clean using a napkin before smiling as the girl got closer. The bubbly girl sat down beside Naruto as she placed a bento box on the table. What you doing eating out here alone? The girl tilted her head causing her ponytail to bounce. Naruto glanced at the napkin in his hands as he began to gently ball it up. Don't really like being in crowds all that much. He gave the girl a small smile as he began to tie up his brown paper bag. Ino glanced at the bag with a small frown as she unwrapped her lunch. Is that all you have to eat? Na glanced down at the bag before shrugging. I
The
don't
Max
really eat
Caulfield
all that
Photo
much.
Memorial
The
Wall.
Yamanaka scooted closer to her friend as she moved the boy's bag away. Here, you can have some of mine. She glanced over at the boy with a small smile. It's really good. Na stared at the girl for a few moments before glancing down at the assortment of different foods. It did look rather tasty.
It's not
As he
exactly
reached for a
pretty and
piece of the
pink,
food,
but no
his hand
shits are
was
good.
gently slapped by the
I
girl.
like my wardrobe.
He shook his head in
Would
slight
Man Ray
annoyance
call
before
themselves
staring at
gorgeous?
Ino, who had a Cheshire smile on her face. She gathered some of the food with her chopsticks before placing it near his face. Say, ah. The boy looked at her indignantly as Ino continued to try to place the food in his mouth. After several seconds of the food hovering near his face, the boy caved. A giant smile morphed on Ino's face as she began to feed Naruto some of her lunch. See, wasn't so hard. It's good, right? The boy nodded in agreement with a muffled hum. Ino continued to feed the boy with her
I'll
occasionally
miss going to
taking
the
her own
games with my
bites.
dad.
Why did you
Go
come
Thunder
back to
Birds.
class that one day? The girl idly began to peel her orange as she glanced at her friend. Naruto glanced at her for a few seconds before turning towards his brown paper bag and balling it up. The Hokage
You
forced
are
me to
thirsty.
go back.
I'm the
He shrugged
worst
afterwards
baby
before throwing his trash
Drink
in a
up.
can that sat a couple feet away. It's boring here. I already know this stuff. Ino tilted
If
her
I'm
head
not looking
before
through a
throwing her
viewfinder,
leftover
I'm
peels
looking
in the
through a
bento
window.
box. Then
Always
why
looking.
don't you tell him that? Na scoffed at the question before resting his cheek on his fist. He won't listen. Never know until you try. She began to swing
One
her
day I'll
feet back
organize
and
my
forth
film
as Naruto
collection.
remained silent.
One day I'll get
The
an
girl
actual
glanced
HD
towards
TV.
her friend before picking up her chopstick and poking him on the nose. A giggle escaped her
Looks
as his
like Dana
nose
left me
curled
a
up from the
Post-it note.
action. She twirled the chopstick in her hand before placing it inside her bento box. Come on, the day is almost over. After class, we can go to my house. The blonde Gingery sighed before slumping in the table. Don't wanna. Ino smiled at the boy before grabbing a
Great.
hold of his
Now
hand
I
and
have to go
dragging
get
him
the
off the
flash drive
bench.
from Dana's room.
The boy refused to even stand to his feet as Ino struggled to pull him. She dug her heels into the ground and began to pull with all her weight. Na smirked before allowing the girl to pull him off the bench. The shift in weight caused Ino to yelp as she tripped backwards. Her skirt rumpled lightly as Naruto was dragged towards her. His eyes began to widen in shock as the girl held on and he toppled over her. Naruto tried to lighten his fall as much as possible as to not cause harm to the petite girl. Ino gave a small grunt as her back connected with the soil with Naruto's hands landing beside her head. The girl shook her head and blinked several times only to notice her friend staring at her in concern. With those beautiful mismatched eyes of his, a small blush colored her face at the position as she tried to wiggle out from under the boy. You okay, Ino? The girl responded with a nod of the head, not trusting her voice. The boy smiled down at her before slowly removing himself off her and gently pulling her to her feet. That's good. Sorry about that. He grinned at the girl before gently grasping her hand and pulling her towards the academy. Ino trailed behind and allowed herself to be pulled by her friend. Her face was red with embarrassment as she glanced several times towards her fellow blonde. If your mom promises to cook food, then I'll definitely come over. The whiskered child exclaimed, I feel like you're using me to get mommy's cooking. The girl gallantly replied to her friend. A sly smile appeared on Naruto's face as he shrugged lightly. The boy began to laugh as Ino huffed in exasperation. Break. You remain idle, Hissen. The aforementioned man glanced towards the person speaking before closing his eyes. I'm observing the boy. Danzo stared at Hirozen for several seconds before shifting his cane. And how long will you observe him? You know as well as I do that something is not right with him. The Sandame Hokage shifted in his seat before slowly and meticulously packing his pipe with tobacco. He lit the object with a simple application of Kaden chakra and inhaled a generous amount of the addictive substance. His personal watcher has observed him for several years now. Abnormal behavior from a child with his condition is not entirely unsurprising. Danzo narrowed his eyes before speaking tersely. And how are you so sure that his watcher isn't providing cover for him? He is too similar to Itachi in that regard. He sighed at the man as he took another drag of his pipe. What Danzo was insinuating was interesting. No did always have a soft spot for the boy, but he doubted very much so that the woman could be manipulated. Na was incredibly intelligent, but there was no way he could get inside the head of a seasoned Ambu captain. But there was always a possibility. Children like Itachi and Na were one of a kind in this world. The only problem with Itachi was that he was pushed too far. I found that particular thought slightly ironic. You would only insinuate such things if you had some sort of proof. The Hokage stared into Danzo's eyes before speaking slowly, which would mean you were watching him. Hai laid his pipe on the table before staring at the man pointedly. I've authorized no such thing. You will refrain from continuing to do so. The two rivals stared directly at one another for several tense moments before Danzo eventually shut his visible eye and nodded. You are making a mistake. I've made many in my life. What is one more? Hai took another drag of his pipe before sighing. I can assure you that No is performing her duties with Konoha's interest in mind. The crippled warhawk shut his eye for several moments before slowly rising from his seat. For your sake as well as Konoha's, I hope she is. We don't need another incident like Itachi. The crippled man vacated the office, leaving Hirozen to his thoughts. The village couldn't afford another incident like with Itachi. Too much pressure on one so young. It was truly a tragedy. Itachi had always been a calm and talented child, humble and well-mannered, so it came as a shock to the village when he cracked. He narrowed his eyes as he took a drag of his tobacco. The Uchiha clan may have been difficult individuals to get along with in the village, but their annihilation at the hands of their most powerful prodigy since Ma was unfortunate. Several members had survived the teens' rampage, but the damage had already been done. No one truly understood what had happened for Itachi to just seemingly snap as he did. The youngest S-rank shinobi in the elemental nations at just 14 years old. He had slaughtered more than half of the shinobi in the Uchiha clan, most of which were comprised of seasoned jonin. After being discovered by a patrolling Ambu unit, he killed the members and severely injured the captain before fleeing the village. A handful of the Uchiha lived on, but it was a night that many would mourn. The Uchihas were an integral part of Konoha. Na was exhibiting signs of following in the boy's footsteps. He was a boisterous individual, and Nico could attest to it, but she had also stated that he allowed you to perceive what you want. The woman had explained that it was similar to a game of sorts to the boy. She was the only person who was in constant contact with the boy. Hai didn't truly understand the explanation, but he got the gist of it. Perhaps Danzo's concerns were well found. The only person in the village with the knowledge of how Naruto's mind worked was No. There was only so much Hirozen could do in regards to Na. The blonde was incapable of being read by the Yamanaka clan. It was a danger to both should they try to delve into his mind.
Of course I do.
Making a proper
Thanks.
diagnosis would be
I locked Dana in
incredibly
because she
difficult.
was sexting
Hai
Zach,
was
my
well aware
boyfriend.
of the sociopathic
Unbelievable.
tendencies that Naruto harbored, and if he was being honest, he felt that Na knew that he knew this information, and it all
do
circled
you
back
know?
to the
Victoria Chase.
situation with
You know her.
Itachi. The same
You could say
symptoms were
that.
being shown, and Herzen knew
Why
that
would
it would
Dana
be
go
far
after
more
your
volatile.
boyfriend?
Na
According
could
to
end up
Victoria,
like
Dana would do
Orochimaru, and that was
anything to
something
date a
that truly
quarterback.
scared the man.
According to
He
Victoria.
would need to find a way to balance Naruto's more
She saw the
negative
sex,
attributes and place
and
him in
Zachary won't answer his
situations that
phone.
were
Once Dana admits it,
net
she can
positive
go.
gains.
Straight
The
to
elderly
hell.
man narrowed his eyes as he thought back to a report given by No just under a week ago. The boy had taken a keen interest in the
I am not
Yamanaka
letting
clan
her out until
Ares.
she tells the truth.
For what reason? It was entirely up in the
Leave
air,
me alone,
but
Max.
considering
Get a
Naruto
clue.
had been
I'm
invited
not
into their
letting her
home,
out until she
it was
tells the
some
truth.
thing to look out for. Perhaps he could use this to his advantage. It would take some time and many negotiations, but he could make this work. He pulled out a
Hey,
scroll and
Juliet.
began to scribble
Is
his thoughts on the
everything cool?
parchment.
Oh yes,
Ino
Max.
Yamanaka
I've
was
locked
the
Dana in
first
the
thing
room
that
because we're
Naruto had
cool.
truly shown an interest in. For the betterment of Konoha
Juliet
break,
Watson,
Naruto
you
and
be
Ino
nice.
walked hand in
I'm
hand
flattered.
towards the
I didn't
Yamanaka
even
clan
think you knew my
compound
name
to
at
spend
all.
the rest of the day together.
Of course I do.
The time had passed by
Thanks.
pretty quickly
I
for the
locked Dana
couple,
in because
and
she was
once the
sexting
bell
Zach,
signaled
my
for the
boyfriend.
students to leave, they were the
Unbelievable.
first to immediately leave. Na quietly
Would
listened
Dana
to
do
Ino
that?
as she
According
described
to
how several
Victoria,
types
Dana
of
would do
flowers
anything
bloomed
to
and
date
which
a
seasons
quarterback.
they would bloom in.
According to Victoria.
She was very knowledgeable in the flora department,
She saw
knowing
the
many
sex,
native plants
and
that
Zachary
grew
won't
within
answer
Fire
his phone.
Country and the names.
Once Dana admits
If
it,
the
she
boy
can
was
go.
being honest,
Straight
it
to
was
hell.
impressive. She was clearly very passionate about flowers. It was cute. And there are these specific subspecies of plants that grow only near the waterfalls of Fire Country,
Answer,
and
you
when they
wuss.
bloom, they take on the shape of a square width. The girl trailed off slightly as she noticed the boy's amused expression. Ino's face began to color red as she realized she had gone off on a complete tangent about flowers. Na glanced at Ino with a small grin before tilting his head. You're cute when you talk about flowers. He began to laugh as the girl's blush grew in intensity. Keep going. Your knowledge about flowers is interesting. The young girl glanced at her friend shyly before replying. Are you sure? I don't want to bore you. People think I'm weird when I talk about flowers and stuff. I just love flowers. Her eyes found the ground after speaking. Na stared in her direction for several moments before gently squeezing her hand. So, who cares what people think? Do and say what makes you happy. He shrugged his shoulders with a small smile as Ino turned towards him in slight shock. Like I said, keep talking. I enjoy
That's real
listening
nice,
to you
Victoria.
speak. A small smile
who the hell
morphed on
thinks I'm a
Ino's face
hipster?
before she began to continue on about flowers and their traits. The
Boom.
entire time,
This is the
Naruto
annoying
listened to the
Juliet.
girl with a small
Now I
smile.
have to print this fast.
The
and get
children made
hell
it to
out
the
of here.
compound as Ino continued to speak about flowers. Several clan members watched the couple walk through the compound in slight amusement. They knew of Ino's obsession with flowers. The blonde couple reached the main house of the compound before entering it. The two began to make their through the house before stopping short of the living room due to hearing Inoki and Saya speaking to one another. Enoki, he's using her as a tool. Be rational, Saya's voice exclaimed rather loudly. The sound of Inoki sighing heavily was heard before the man began to speak. I know Saya, I'm not disagreeing with you. Hai has his beliefs and he was cut off from speaking as Saya slammed her hands on the table. Ino jumped at the rather loud noise as Naruto gently squeezed her hand. He began to move closer towards the entrance of the living room and peeked his head out slightly with Ino a step behind. Do
This
not
better
justify
convince
his
Juliet that
reasonings.
Dana is innocent.
My daughter isn't some political tool to be paraded around like a monkey. The woman screamed in frustration as Inoki grimaced. Her husband began to rub his face with both hands before sighing. What would you have me do, Sia? My hands are tied. The woman trembled in aggravation as she bounced her legs from her spot on the couch. I don't know. The woman began to tug on her dress before sighing heavily. I want my little flower to be happy. She doesn't deserve to be forced into situations because the Hokage finds it convenient. I don't want to force her to do anything she doesn't want to do. The woman was pulled into an embrace by her husband as he gently
Stop
ran his
zoning,
fingers
Max.
through her
You have the
hair.
paper, so
He
go.
kissed her head lovingly before responding. I know, my love. I will see what I can do. The two adults heard a slight creaking of wood before turning their heads towards the noise. The couple spotted Ino and Na glancing from behind a wall as Ino glared at her friend for making a noise. The boy sheepishly rubbed his head while apologizing. The scene caused the married couple to smile slightly. Narujuwaki Ino Yamanaka. The two children froze at the voice of Sia as she slowly stood from the couch with her hands on her hips. She
Juliet,
stared at
read
them with a
this.
stern visage before calling them into the room. The two blondes slowly made their way to the woman who began to
course.
smile down at them. It's rude to eavesdrop, you two. She placed her hand on Ino's cheek and
I'm an
gently began to
asshole.
caress her face
I'm
before
sorry, Dana.
glancing at Na.
You are.
How much did you
And I
two
hope
hear?
so.
The boy shrugged with a small
really think
smile
I'd mess
before
around with
tinkering with
Zach,
his
no?
mask.
But I
Ah,
get
a
stupid
lot.
jealous.
Sia
I
nodded
owe you
slightly
dinner.
before sighing.
Still
How
love
about
me?
I make a
And
home-cooked
you do my
meal?
laundry.
She chuckled
Thanks,
at the
Max.
sight of the two
You're
children
like a
who
black
grinned
hole
with
ninja.
joy at the
Now let's
question.
see what Zach
The
has to
woman
say about
gestured with her head
Victoria.
before speaking.
You set me
Run
free.
along and go play.
Thank you.
I'll call you when the
Warren's
food
flash
is
drive
ready.
is on my desk.
The two children nodded their heads before running off to the backyard. Well, it isn't all that bad, is it? Enaki grasped
Almost
Sai's hand in his
Get the
own and
flash
stroked
drive
the
and
back
then
of
I'll
her
go see
hand with his
Warren.
thumb. The
Hey,
woman
Dana.
sighed to herself
Seriously,
before pulling a
thanks
Noiki
again.
towards her. They
I
are
can't
rather
believe
cute
Juliet
together.
locked me in my
She
own
buried
room.
her face in the crook
Real
of the
mature.
man's neck as he began to laugh. Come, I'll help you cook. Saya scoffed at her husband before pulling away. You'll do more harm than good. Last
Victoria
time I
is
let you
not
cook,
nice.
you burned the
I don't
meal.
get it. She
You'll
has
wait just like
everything.
the children will.
And to pull that prank on
Anoiki
a
began to
friend?
laugh before
Just
following
because
his
they're in the
wife into
Vortex
the
Club
kitchen to
doesn't
harass
mean they're
her.
BFFs.
The married
I'm in
couple
it, and
throwing
Victoria
shots at one
creeps me
another
out.
that had no
Max,
real
you're
venom
smart to be
behind
a
it.
loner here.
Perhaps
Though
things
Warren
wouldn't be
obviously
so
likes hanging
bad.
with you.
Cage bunkans were an incredibly interesting jutsu. They took on your looks, mannerisms, abilities. They were even capable of
What do you
individual
mean?
thought.
Oh,
Shadow
nothing.
clones were very much
When you open the
self-aware,
flash drive,
and it
didn't
was
you see the
noticeable.
special folder called Maps?
They instinctively knew that
Yeah,
they were but a
okay.
hair's breadth away from
gotcha.
death at all
Are you
times and would act
blushing?
recklessly at the behest of their master.
Go ahead and grab the flash drive
Mismatched
whenever.
orbs studied the entity that stood in front of them with a scrutinizing gaze. Na tilted his head as the doppelganger mimicked his actions. A small frown began to form on the boy's face the longer he stared at it. There was something off about his clones. They weren't him, not in the conventional sense. He knew this, but a cage bunk was supposed to be an exact replica of the individual who was using the jutsu. Na felt no sense of similarity
better
when
make sure
gazing
everything
into
is
the
still
eyes
in
of his
there.
clones.
I
They didn't think
Warren
like
forgot
him,
to hide the
didn't
Party
talk
Buster
like him,
folder.
and most certainly
Not that I
weren't
would
him.
open it no matter how
Who are you?
tempting.
Narrat.
I have my
Yumaki.
self-respect.
The cage bunkin stared back at the boy before a crazed smile formed on its face as it replied to its master. I'm you. The clone immediately dissipated into a cloud of smoke after its statement as the blond boy frowned. Break. Narrat shifted his porcelain mask as he waited outside the main building of the Yamanaka compound. Ino's birthday party was going to be happening today and Sia had told him to occupy the girl for the day. The boy found it slightly amusing that the girl was unaware of exactly what day it
Of
was.
course, a popular
It made
cheerleader
his
like
job
Dana
much
would have
easier
a
to
million
accomplish.
friends.
The girl in question
So
came
fascinating
bounding
to get
out
a
the
peek
house
into
with a
Dana's
bag
social
strapped
media
over her
world.
shoulders.
And
Na
yes,
raised an
Max,
eyebrow
so
at the bag
terribly
before
wrong.
glancing towards the bubbly blonde. She was in a simple white sundress with several sunflowers placed on the fabric for design. Her back was turned to him as she yelled back into the house to inform her parents she'd be back. The girl turned towards him and flashed him a beautiful smile. He returned the gesture with a small smile of his own and a slight incline of his head. The girl bounded down the steps of her home before hooking her arm through his and skipping off towards wherever she was deciding to drag him to. He didn't mind all that much. Whatever she wanted to do, he'd do. Ino was an enigma. His gaze remained on her as she spoke about the several things they were going to do today. He was listening, but at the same time wasn't. He was focused on her and only her. It seemed the voices in his head would always quiet down when around Ino, as if wanting to hear anything everything she spoke about. Whether it was about clothes or the wonderful world of Flora, she seemed to somehow have a way to curb his more violent urges and impulses. Even now, when the voice he had grown so accustomed to hearing when growing up and was contributed to his more violent actions was silent. That voice, Na knew that voice, at least he thought he did. It was familiar yet so alien. It was his own but more twisted in nature. A side of him that he neither repressed nor embraced. It just existed. He was aware of it and it was aware of him. He hadn't remembered a day when the voice wasn't with him. The voice was muffled most of the time and could barely be heard over the more aggressive desires that
I better
bounded in his
rewind.
thoughts. But he was able to drown out those thoughts and focus solely on that voice when it spoke. The words he could hear, which weren't much, were usually bits and pieces of information. Naruto had learned to walk on water because of this voice. No had explained that tree walking was easy and that water walking was something done when your chakra control was more fine-tuned. The voice had only said that the distribution of chakra had to match the movements of the water because the water was always moving. It wasn't stationary like trees and walls. You needed to work with the water instead of against it. Na blinked several times as Ino's face appeared in his vision. The girl had a small pout as she tugged on his arm. Naruto, you aren't listening. The boy blinked again before glancing around the area they were now in. His eyebrows furrowed in confusion as he noticed that they were on top of the Hokage monument. Had he truly been lost in his thoughts? Sorry, was just thinking. The girl frowned at the answer before huffing slightly. As I was SAIing, Naruto smiled at the girl's exasperated tone. Mommy made some sandwiches and I wanted to have a little picnic on top of the monument and gaze at the village. She pulled him along as she continued to speak. After this, you're going to teach me how to walk up trees. Na raised an eyebrow as Ino pushed through the metal gate that was used as a deterrent for civilians so they didn't deface the monument. If that's what you want, then sure. The platinum blonde pumped her fist in joy as she guided him to the fourth Hokage's bust. The girl unlatched from his arm and began to rummage through her bag.
No,
She pulled
and
out a
leave
black
me
blanket
alone.
and proceeded to meticulously place the fabric down before taking several small sandwiches out of the bag and placing them on a plate. She proceeded to pull out a large jug of juice and 2 cups before placing them on the
Please,
blanket.
leave me alone.
How did all of those objects even fit in her bag? Come on. Ino patted the spot next to her as she tucked her dress underneath her and sat down. Na blinked several times before sitting
you
down
enjoyed
and
the
staring
show.
into the village.
Thanks for
A
nothing.
wave of
thanks.
anger and happiness swirled in his body as he gazed at the village. It was like this all the
I
time.
should've
An
stepped
extreme
in
hate for
between
Konoha,
David.
but at the same
That
time an
asshole
extreme
was
love
so
for it
over
as
the
well.
line.
It was his home
I
and he
could
should be
rewind and
happy.
try something
But he was
different.
always angry, fueled with vitriol from the treatment of strangers for something he had no control of. Naruto's hand clawed at the soft fabric beneath him as his mismatched pupils gazed at the many buildings standing in Konoha. There were days he would envision himself toppling these very same buildings. Sometimes
Hey,
in dreams,
why don't you
other
leave her
times in
alone?
his thoughts.
Excuse
Being alone
us,
with his
this is
thoughts were
official
always
campus
dangerous.
business.
Every time his
Excuse
head
me,
hit
you
his
shouldn't be
pillow,
yelling at
he would be in
students
another
or
life,
bullying them.
another Na, someone who
Nobody is
possessed the
bullying
same face and
anybody.
same
I'm
voice with
doing my
different
job.
No,
mannerisms.
you're not.
He didn't
You're part of the
understand the
problem,
dreams and
Missy.
if he was
I
being
will
honest,
remember this
he didn't really
conversation.
want to. He always felt like there was 2 people tugging on his arms pulling him to be this person and vice versa.
Oh,
Who
Max,
was Na
that was
Uzumaki?
great.
What did
I
it
think
mean
you
to be
scared him
Na
for once.
Uzumaki?
I
Hey
have to
Na,
go, but
what's the
thank
one
you.
thing in the
It
world you
means
want
a
the
lot.
most?
Anytime.
The boy in question was roused from his thoughts at the question that Ino asked.
I felt like an everyday hero.
The boy
helping
tilted his
Kate,
head
but
curiously as
now
Ino
Officer
turned towards
David
him with a
Dickhead is
smile.
after me.
What's one thing in the world
Maybe
that
I
you
should
want the
rewind
most?
and mind my
Na
own
blinked at the
business?
question before grasping his mask and placing it in his lap. His eyes gazed at the porcelain material before slowly running his finger over it. The young Yamanaka stared at her friend with slight concern as she noticed the small frown on his face. Clarity. Ino tilted her head with furrowed eyebrows before speaking. Clarity. What's that? Ah. I want things to make sense. The boy's mismatched pupils continued to gaze at the mask as Ino began to scoot closer to her friend. She gently placed one of her hands on top of the boy's own and began to stroke his hand. Several seconds of silence passed by before Naruto continued to speak. There are times where I feel like I don't know who I am. Its other boy's expression shifted several times in frustration as his hands gripped his mask tighter. It's weird. There are days where I feel like I'm not living. Ino's head tilted in confusion as she gently stroked the boy's hand. Like, you're not living. She watched as the boy's eyes
I'm glad I
narrowed
stepped
before
in
a
that
frown
time.
morphed on his
Can't
face.
stand to see people being
Like,
bullied.
I can see everything that's happening in front of me, but I'm unable to do anything about it. I'm sorry. I know it doesn't make any sense. Na sighed heavily as Ino shook her head. No. I'm probably not
What
the
up,
best
Max?
person to
How are
talk
you?
about
Here's your
these things.
flash. Thanks.
Yeah. Daddy
No
is usually
problem.
the talker. But is there anything I can do to maybe
Check out my
help
new
you?
wheels.
She watched as
Cool.
Shiboy's
Very
eyes
old
became
school.
slightly unfocused before
1978
he
to be
slowly
exact.
blinked.
Now we can go to the
Several
drive-in.
seconds of
There's one in
silence
Newburgh
passed
just
by
60
before
miles
the
away.
boy slowly
You're in
shook
the
his
wrong
head.
time, Warren.
You being my
But then,
friend is
so
enough.
am I.
Narek
okay?
glanced at Eno out the corner
It's
of
been
his eye
one
before
strange
slowly
fucking
placing his
day.
mask back onto his
Man, I
face.
saw that Victoria didn't
I'll be
take down that
fine.
pic of you
Eno
on
tilted
Facebook.
her head at the slight
Major
180
bitch move.
before the boy flashed her a toothy grin. Her teal eyes averted with a slight blush as she placed her hands into her lap. Come on, let's teach you how
I
to
don't wanna
walk up
talk
some
about it.
trees.
Jeez.
We can do it
You're
in
a
the
little
park.
missensitive
A
today.
smile formed
I
on
wouldn't
Eno's
push her
face
luck,
as she
Warren.
shot to her
Not in the
feet
mood
and began
today.
to gather
So,
the
did you get a
plates,
chance to check out the
cups,
movie
and
booty on my
leftover
flash
sandwiches
drive?
before placing them in her bag. She picked the jug of juice up
No,
before
I've been
placing
way too
inside
busy
the
with
bag in
class
top of the other
and
items.
life.
Damn,
Well,
girl, you had
what
it
are
like
we
a
waiting
year.
for?
Or a
Let's
week.
go.
I
The
did
girl
browse
began
throughout
to
the
roll up the
titles,
blanket
drama
as Narek
queen.
stood to his
Ha
feet with an
ha.
amused glint
Make
in
sure
his
you watch
eyes.
Cannibal
A
Holocaust.
small smirk formed on his face before shifting to a
No
small
fucking
smile
way
as
will
the
I
girl
watch
turned
that.
her
My
attention on
mind is
him with a
twisted
tilted
enough.
head.
I
Eno
laughed
reached
my
for the
ass
boy's
off.
hand and began to move
So you're
before being
sensitive.
halted in place.
Ouch.
She
that
turned her
sounds
head
awful
towards
the way you
Narek,
say it.
who was staring into the village with a narrowed gaze. As she was going to question her friend about his lack of movement, he began to speak.
No, I was impressed.
Go
you got
ahead and
faster
make your way
pussycat
down
kill
the
kill.
monument. I'll catch
Mayor
up in
was
a
a
second.
genius of
A
black and
small
white.
frown formed
Plus,
on
babes
Eno's
with
face at the
breasts.
boy's statement
Who
as
would
she
beat
gently
your
squeezed his
sensitive ass
hand.
down?
Na
If I was
turned towards
lucky.
her and gave her a
Speaking of
small
hip and
smile
fast,
with a nod
we
of
should
his
cruise out
head.
in my car to an
She
actual
returned the
movie
boy's
this week.
smile and began to skip
But you seem
towards the gate
distracted.
without another word. Na watched her retreating form for several seconds before staring off into the village.
I don't want to speak about it.
Naruto's arms crossed
This is
against
kind of
his
a
chest
crazy
as the
day for
sound
me.
of wood clacking against
I mean,
hardened earth
I
invaded
literally
his
think
hearing.
I'm going crazy.
The
I
Gingeriki
may be a
slowly turned
pest,
his gaze
but
towards
I'm a
the
good
elderly
listener.
man who now stood slightly out of
For
arm's
reals,
reach.
Warren. This
His
is between
violet
you
orb
and me,
stared at the wooden
not
cane in
social
the
media.
elderly man's hands
Don't
before
insult me.
shifting towards the man's face.
Go on.
The young
I had
boy's
this
masked visage
incredibly
bore into the
bizarre
elderly
experience
man's
in Mr.
single visible
Jefferson's
eye.
class today.
Neither spoke to each
mean,
other as the air began to
life-changing.
thicken with tension.
Have you
After
ever
an
had a
entire
dream
minute of
so
silence,
real it was
Naruto's
like a
head
movie?
began to tilt as a small
Max
smile
caught feeling
formed on
right.
his face. You're
You're one
dangerous.
of the
The
Jefferson's
elderly
photo
man
groupies?
continued to stare
I'm
at
one
the
of
young
his
boy in
students.
front of him
What the
before
fuck
shifting his
ever.
cane slightly.
I know you like to take
Your
pictures,
little facade does
especially
not
when you're
fool
hiding
me.
out in the bathrooms.
Danzo watched as the
You best
boy's
tell me
visible
what
eye
you told the
glinted with
principal.
amusement.
Now.
Facade. What's that mean? Danzo continued to
Answer
stare
me,
at the
bitch.
boy, choosing not to
What are you
respond to the
talking about?
question.
I know you're
He
new
knew
here,
how
but don't
dangerous
even play
Naruto could be
stupid
and
with
was
me.
far more
I'm
aware
not
of it than
new.
his
I've
old
lived here
rival
for
was.
years.
I'm
Then you
not
should
Hissen
know
boy,
the Prescotts
and I do not
own
have a
this
problem
shithole.
doing what I
Then you don't
believe
have
is
to
best
worry
for
about
Konoha.
me. Worry about yourself.
Danzo immediately
Do not
detected a
analyze
slight
me.
shift in the
I
boy's
pay people
eye.
for that.
It was fleeting and
about
disappeared
yourself,
almost
Max
immediately
Coffey.
after appearing. But what Danzo had saw, there was something inhuman in that gaze, something
I
twisted
could call
and
the
dark.
police.
You
Do it.
Shinobi are all the
Prescotts
same.
own the
The
pigs.
young
Get away
blonde
from her,
shifted his
dude.
attention away before placing his hands into his
Hey,
pockets.
leave him alone.
Danzo narrowed
Nobody
his gaze
tells me
before
what
lightly
to do.
tapping his
Not
cane
my
against the
parents,
rock
not the
softly.
principal, or that
Threats to
whore in the
Konoha are
bathroom.
dealt with swiftly. Narek slowly closed his eyes as a smile appeared on his face. Konoha rots from the
Max?
inside.
Chloe?
If I were you,
No
I'd sleep with
way.
one eye open.
You
The statement
again.
caused Danzo's eyes to narrow even further. The young Gingeriki began to walk away from the elderly man while waving his hand over his shoulder uncaring.
Don't even try to
Lie.
run.
Before reaching the gate of the monument,
Nobody.
he spoke one last time. The Grim Reaper of Konoha is always watching. Danzo's grip on his cane tightened as the young blonde disappeared from the monument. The elderly man was intimately familiar with that nickname and the individual who possessed it. The youngest S-rank shinobi to ever grace the elemental nations and quite possibly could be named the most talented as well.
Nathan
Takeha,
Prescott is
this boy,
messed up.
he was proving to be
and
far more
dangerous.
dangerous than Danzo thought.
This day never
He would need to
ends.
move discreetly
Oh,
from
and
now
thanks,
on.
Chloe.
Itachi had been one of the boy's watchers
After
when he was
5
younger
years, you're still
before
Max
Yugao had
Caulfield.
took over after the Uchiha's promotion to Anbu captain.
Don't
Danzo
give me
would
the
need to
guilty
deal
face.
with
At
no
least
discreetly
pretend
if
you're
she
glad
was
to
being
see me.
compromised.
I am seriously
Break.
glad
Na
to see
possessed
you.
a small smile as he took slow steps down the massive staircase leading down the monument. Placing his hands in his pockets, he glanced towards his right and smiled at Nico, who was crouching on the metal guard of the staircase. Is it wise to tip your hand so soon? The purple-haired woman tilted her head after her question as the boy shrugged lightly before shifting his body towards her and tugging his mask over his face. It doesn't matter. The old man is likely already connecting the dots in regards to Itachi. No remained in her crouched position before inclining her head and glancing down towards the bottom of the staircase. They are still watching. The young blonde shrugged his shoulders before raising his hand towards his masked visage and exclaiming loudly, "I will be more careful next time. Yuga NC Han." He proceeded to wave at the woman before continuing on his journey as Nico stared at his retreating form.
I had
The
to
woman
use the
continued to
bathroom.
stare at the boy
Girls
before
always use
disappearing
that
in a
excuse.
shuncheon to look over her
Excuse
ward
for
from
what?
afar.
For whatever
He
you're
was
up
truly
to,
kicking
your
things
face
off
is
now.
covered in
Great.
guilt.
The
Nano.
alarm tripped me
Yino
out.
yelped
Then
as her
trip
vision
on outta
focused
here,
on the
Missy,
ground that was
or are you
rapidly
hiding
approaching.
something?
The
Huh?
girl shut her eyes as she
Thank you,
awaited
Mr.
for the
Madsen.
inevitable pain from falling
Situation is
down the
under
tree.
control. There's no
Several
emergency
seconds
here.
went by
Leave Miss
before she
Caulfield
slowly
alone,
opened
and
her eyes to
please
the
turn
amused
off that
face of her
alarm
best
since
friend.
that's your job.
"You think I'd let you fall?" Naruto's left arm rested underneath the girl's legs as his right arm looped around her back. The girl's face began to heat up as she averted her gaze from the blonde Jinchuriki. The young boy
Don't
was
wander
silent
around
before
here.
shrugging
Get
his
on
shoulders.
outside.
"Let's head on back to the compound. You got running and walking down, Pat, which is way better than I
wander around
managed to
here.
do on the
Get
first day."
outside.
A swell of pride blossomed in Ino's chest as she let the boy's praise wash over her. I'm just that talented." She tilted her head up slightly
You
as
look a little
Naruto began
stressed
to
out.
slowly walk towards
you
her bag
okay?
whilst
I'm-
still carrying
I'm
her.
Just a little
Yes,
worried about my
that and you have less than a
future.
sliver of
Are you
my
sweating
entire
pinballs?
chakra pool.
Is that all you're thinking
Ino's
about?
cheeks puffed up in annoyance as she
always
began
be
to
upfront
squirm
with
in
me,
her
Max.
friend's hold.
Or have
"Stop
you
bullying
done
me."
something
The
wrong?
11-year-old
Is
Gingeriki
that
just
it?
grinned as he hooked his foot
Well,
under the
Max,
straps of the girl's bag
talk
and
to
with a
me.
show of dexterity flinged it onto the girl's lap. Ino began to try to detach herself from her friend's hold before Naruto shook his head, stopping her. "Nah, I think I'll carry you. But I can walk just fine, Naruto." "Yeah, but I want to do this.
I just
Is
saw
it a
Nathan
problem?"
Prescott
The boy tilted
waving a
his head
gun
at the
around
girl whose cheeks began
in
to
the
burn.
girls' room.
Nathan
The young
Prescott.
Yamanaka slowly shook her head before
You sure?
relaxing in
Yes,
Naruto's hold.
He was in the bathroom
Good.
talking
Onward
to
to the
himself with a
Yamanaka
gun.
clan
I
compound
saw
where the pretty
everything. He
lady
was
will make us
babbling like
delicious
crazy.
food.
Okay, slow
Ino
down.
pumped her fist
Slow
to the
down.
boy's cheer as
So
she
now
joined
you
in.
saw this
"Mommy's
without him seeing you.
food. Mommy's
I was hiding
food.
behind a
Mommy's
stall.
food." The two young
I have the
blondes
right to be
proceeded to
there.
laugh at
It's
their
the
cheers
girls'
as they
room.
made
I
their way to the
know,
Yumeka clan
I just want to
compound.
be completely clear
"Great,
what happened.
why haven't I chosen a
Mr.
successor
Prescott
yet?"
happens to
Hi
be from the
uttered to
town's
himself
most
as he
distinguished
stared at a
family,
rather lengthy
and
document
one of
filled with
Blackwell's
miscellaneous
most honored
travel.
students.
Being a cage was
So
a
it's hard
bothersome
for me to see him
responsibility,
brandishing a
but at the
weapon
end
in
of the
the girls'
day,
bathroom.
he chose to be it.
So what
Well,
happened next?
not really. Tobarama
Then-
kind of just dumped the responsibility
left.
on him when he
I ran out
sacrificed
here
his life to the
wondering what to
Gaku
do.
Kingaku hunting
Are
squad.
you gonna bust him?
But
This
nevertheless,
is
he still
serious
chose to
charge.
continue serving as the Hokage even
I'll look
after
into the matter
Manado's death.
personally. Thank
In
you for bringing
hindsight,
it to my
he
attention.
definitely should have recalled
That's
Sunyunin or
it?
Jiraiya back and
After what I
demand them
told
to
you?
We'll
take the hat.
continue this discussion
He wasn't getting any
later
younger.
in my
The elderly
office.
man continued to
Please
grumble
go
and gripe
outside
to
with the
himself
rest of
for
your
the next
class
10
now, Miss
minutes,
Caulfield.
completely unaware that someone was standing
Of
in
course,
front
this
of him.
academic drone
The
won't do
individual in the
anything
middle
since
of the room
Prescott
continued to
family
stare
owns
at the
Blackwell
Hokage
now.
with amusement as he placed
Should
his
I
hands
rewind?
into his
Wander
pockets.
around here. Get on
Perhaps he
outside.
should call attention to himself. I did call him here to speak with him about something important. Losing your touch there. Hokage-sama here as intense at the voice as his gaze immediately snapped up to find one of his most prominent shinobi just staring at him. The elderly man sighed to himself as Kakashi Hatake began to chuckle to himself. The third Hokage grumbled quietly before placing his utensil on his desk and clearing his throat. "When did you even get here, Kakashi?" The sharing wielder shrugged his shoulders with an eye smile before responding. "A while ago. I wanted to see how long it would take for you notice me. You know that I'm a people watcher. Your voyeuristic tendencies continue to amaze me." Kakashi peeked and I opened before lightly shrugging. "Everyone has their fetishes, Hokage-sama." Hai proceeded to exhale through his nose before clasping his hands together and eyeing the Jonin with a hard gaze. "There's a reason I called you here today, Kakashi." The Hokage's statement
Rachel
caused the
Amber.
silver-haired shinobi to
She
stand
looks so
taller.
hopeful
"I have
and
been
pretty.
looking into some things regarding
what happened
Itachi's
to her.
actions and the subsequent events that lead to his breakdown." Kakashi nodded his head slowly before crossing his arms against his chest. "I have noticed a pattern, one that is beginning to surface yet again, but with another member that was a part of team." Kakashi furrowed his eyebrows at the statement before tilting his head. Who here narrowed his eyes before pulling out a thick folder from underneath his desk. He slowly opened the folder before skimming through several pages and rotating the document towards Kakashi. The man leaned in towards the desk before frowning at the page the Hokage was showing him. On the page was a picture of Yuga's shinobi ID. Most of the document was redacted due to her tenure in the Anbu, but Kakashi knew that this went far deeper. Somehow Yuga was being connected to Itachi, and the only similarities the
I
two
better
possessed
read
were being in
Warren's text
Anbu
before
being
he
a part
blows
of
my
Team
phone.
Ro, and Kakashi's lips parted before
This is a
staring into
great
Hirozen's
image. All
eyes.
those rippling green
You are sure
coins.
about this? Hai glanced towards Yuga's folder before sighing lowly. Itachi was Naruto's watcher for 3 years. During those 3 years, there were many abnormalities that were overlooked due to his unique position in the Shinobi Corps and because of his age. I wrote the behavior off due to his age and thought process, but clearly that was a mistake. His went silent for several seconds before pulling out his trusty pipe and packing it with tobacco. As you know, Yuga has been watching the boy for close to 4 years now. I have reason to suspect she has been compromised. Kakashi stood frozen in astonishment at the man's statement. You believe that Naruto Uzumaki has not only manipulated one of the most talented shinobi in Konoha, but that he has done it twice now. Hai inhaled a healthy amount of tobacco before blowing out the addictive substance slowly. Makoto has come to me recently about some things that revolved around Itachi that he should have no knowledge of regarding their clan and the happenings inside of Konoha. Kakashi tilted his head in confusion before gesturing with his hand for an explanation. Hirozen sighed before closing his eyes and spinning in his chair while raising his pipe. Itachi had knowledge of the inner workings of the Uchiha clan. Despite the fact that Fugaku forbade Itachi from any of the clan's meetings due to his duties in the Anbu Corps, the elderly man proceeded to stand up from his chair and slowly walked around the room while glancing at the portraits of the previous Hokage. Now, that's not really groundbreaking information because of how talented Itachi was in the clan. But Itachi knew about Danzo's plan regarding the Uchihaku. Kakashi frowned at the statement before crossing his arms. But that's not possible. I was the only person that knew about this. You, in particular, told me of how he would proceed to deal with the revolt. He glanced at the silver-haired shinobi out of the corner of his eye before nodding his head. You are my most loyal shinobi besides Jiraiya, and even I didn't inform him of Danzo's plan. How and why does this involve Na? He placed his hands behind his back before moving towards the giant window in the office. He stood still as he looked over the many buildings and people who were happily conversing with another. I do not believe that Naruto is what he portrays himself to be. That doesn't really explain anything. Hokage-sama, I'm well aware of the village's opinion towards him. Kakashi placed a hand into his pocket before gesturing with his other. He's not exactly normal, but do you truly believe he has some I don't know ability to manipulate people that are on the level of Itachi? It sounds extremely far-fetched. He pursed his lips before slowly nodding. I understand why this seems strange to you, considering there is very little evidence besides odd behavior and coincidences. But what have I always said about coincidences? Kakashi, the silver-haired shinobi, acquiesced to that statement. Shinobi most certainly did not believe in coincidences. It might be the paranoia speaking, but being paranoid was better than being dead, and that's all that really mattered. Okay, so say I do believe what you're saying. How does no fit in this?
Yo, Justin.
Yugao has been of the most loyal shinobi to Konoha. Her record is as clean as mine. Why do you believe she's been compromised? Hai didn't answer the question and proceeded to just stare out into the village.
What's your first move gonna be?
After a minute of silence, the man sighed
jump?
before tilting his
You're
head
such
down.
a poser.
Na
If you
knows
can't
her
even
name
name a
break.
simple nose
A
slide or
smile
tray
formed on
flip,
Naruto's
you
face
walk
as he
on.
watched Ino tear into several of her presents with childlike happiness. The 12-year-old girl was surrounded by several random girls from their class as well as some of the other clan heirs and heiresses. The boys' mismatched pupils glanced around the rather large backyard of Ino's home with a calculating
What's up, Daniel?
gaze. All of the clan heirs and heiresses had shown up with the clan heads
ask you a
themselves
question?
making an appearance as well.
Would you mind?
A small smirk
me
formed
sketch
on
you?
his face as he
I do
spotted
put
the small
my
group of
sketches on
Uchihas
Facebook,
in the
though.
back corner of the party. Sasake was seated with his mother and cousin
I'd
who
be
were
honored,
watching the
Daniel.
children.
Makes me
Na
feel
began
like
to
I'm
make his way towards the
Finally,
group of
you should
sharing
say
wielders
that.
with a
I
small
was
smile
just
on his
thinking
face.
about my real
He didn't get within 5 feet of the
Rachel
raven-haired
Miller.
members before being halted in place by their stares. Uchiha members were dangerous. Naruto's small smile disappeared as he stared at the group before placing his hands into his pockets. I'm
Okay.
sorry about what happened.
Why don't you start
It's
throwing
sad
me,
that so many
even
people
though I
died.
must be a step
The young
down from
Gingeriki
Rachel.
studied the reactions of the
way,
3
you're a
Uchihas in
good
front of him with a
substitute.
keen gaze. Sasek's face contorted into a glare as his hands clenched together tightly.
Oh,
Naruto knew
that's a
about the
good posture.
boy's hatred towards his brother. It wasn't entirely unfounded. After all, Itachi did kill a lot of people. It was justifiable in the end. But Na didn't care about Sasuke's reaction. He wanted to see how Makoto and Shiui would react. These two were the dangerous ones. The matriarch of the Uchiha
Best
stared
portrait
directly into Naruto's violet orb with a blank expression. After several monas of silence, the woman proceeded to rest her cheek on her fist. The Uchiha do not need pity. Not from this village, its people, and most certainly not from a child. The woman's eyes proceeded to close before she continued. But that is not why you're here. Naru Uzumaki speak. Naruto's violet orb glanced
Do I have
towards
to?
Shisui, who was
I
now
just
ignoring the
don't think it's that big a
conversation in
deal.
its entirety.
Max,
A small smirk formed on his face as he stared directly at the woman. Itachi was a nice man. Or so I heard. Na shrugged his shoulders, uncaring of the hardened stares he was now receiving from Sasake and Shiui. Can't really tell these days. Some people just crack at the slightest signs of pressure. Naruto's statement caused a particularly loud outburst to erupt from his classmate. Shut up. You don't know. A knife. Sasake was immediately silenced by his cousin, who appeared directly beside him with his hand covering his mouth and his arms restrained to his sides. Makoto didn't react to her son's outburst and continued to stare at Na even as several attendees began to overlook the interaction. What is your goal? Na smiled innocently at Makoto's statement and began to tinker with his mask. Girl. I don't know what you mean, pretty lady. I can't see into the future like you can. His smile grew in size as Makoto finally reacted to his words. The woman sported a heavy frown before glancing towards her nephew and gesturing with her hand. We're leaving. The woman proceeded to stand from her seat while placing her hand on her son's shoulder and disappearing without another word. Na glanced at the last Uchiha, whose gaze bore directly into the box and pulling out a mask that was very similar to the one that Naruto wore. The only difference being the size of the mask and the color of the designs on it. The porcelain material was the same shade as Naruto's, with the designs being a dark purple. Ino glanced up towards Naruto, who was smirking with his hand in his pocket. You're always trying to wear my mask. I figured that you'd want one of
Just
your
relax.
own. He
Stop
shrugged while
torturing
gently
yourself.
taking the mask from Ino's
You
grasp
have
and
a
placing it
gift.
near her face. I bet you'll look cuter in it. He proceeded to wink as the girl began to blush before placing the object on the girl's face. Similar to Na, the mask sagged slightly before being adjusted to only
When the
cover
door
a portion
closes,
of the blonde's
window
face.
opens.
Ino was quiet for a
Something
scant
like
few
that.
moments before a small grin appeared on her face. I love
Okay,
it.
girl, you
Thank
get
you
a
so
photo op
much,
like this every
Naruto-kun.
day.
The girl flung herself towards her friend, who had to brace himself so he wouldn't fall backwards. Na returned the girl's embrace before whispering in her ear. Ino immediately pulled back with a blush as she began to slap her friend's chest. Don't say things like that. Na just began to laugh before slowly leaning towards the girl and placing a kiss on her cheek.
Whoa. Where
Ino's
did that
eyes
butterfly
widened in
come
shock
from?
as Nara cheekily
It
smiled
doesn't
before
look like
walking
any
away.
kind I've ever seen
The
before.
blonde Yamanaka didn't
The
move
blue
from her
wings are
spot
practically
even as her
glowing.
friends from class
I
began
can
to surround
almost
her
feel
and
the air moving
gush
around
about
me.
the boy's action.
The butterfly
Saya
feels
softly
almost
smiled
like
at
a
the
spirit.
interaction before gathering the rest of the girls' presents and moving them into the house. She passed by several attendees before opening the door to her home and placing the assortment of gifts
cool,
in the
Nathan.
living room.
Don't
Saya
stress.
hummed to
You're
herself
okay, bro.
before
Just
turning
count
around
to
and
3.
blinking at the sight of Naro, who was leaning on the door's
You
entrance.
own this school. If I
Naruto,
wanted, I could
is
blow
there
it
something
up.
you need?
You're the
The
boss.
woman watched as the boy's expression shifted into a small frown.
So what do you want?
I need to go.
I
I'm
hope you check
sorry.
the perimeter,
I won't
as
be
my
able to
step-ass
stay
would say.
until the end.
Now,
Is there something
talk
wrong?
business.
I got
Maybe I
nothing
can
for
help.
you.
Na
Wrong.
glanced
You got
away for
hella
a second
cash.
before placing
my
his hands
family,
into his
not me.
pockets.
Oh, boo-hoo,
No,
poor little rich
it's
kid.
all right,
I know
pretty
you've been
lady.
pumping drugs
Tell
and shit to
Ino
kids
I
around
had a
here.
nice time today.
I bet your respectable
Saya
family
watched
would
as the
help me
boy
out if I
passed
went
by
to
her
them.
before exiting the
Man, I
home
can
without
see the
another
headlines
word.
now.
She
Leave
pursed her
them
lips for a
out of
few
this
moments
bitch.
before sighing and
I can
shaking
tell
her head.
everybody Nathan
Ino
Prescott
wasn't
is a punk
going
ass
to be
who begs
happy
like
now.
a little girl
Great,
and talks to
just
himself.
great.
You don't
Mismatched
know who
pupils
the fuck
stared
I
at the
am
bounty
or
of
who you're
children
messing
who were
around with.
aimlessly running around the park
What are
playing
you
games.
doing? Come
The
on,
young
put that thing
blonde
down.
shifted in his
Ever.
seated
Tell me
position
what to
atop
do.
the largest
I'm so
tree in the park.
sick of people
The
trying to
11-year-old
control me.
blonde frowned
You're
as the
going to get
children
in
ran
hella more
around the
trouble
park,
for this than
tagging one
drugs.
another in a
Nobody
silly little
would
game.
ever even
What a
miss your
miserable
punk ass, would they?
existence.
Get that
Had
gun
his
away
mind
from
truly
me,
been
psycho!
warped so much that just the
No!
thought of doing something so pointless as playing tag filled him with disgust? These children would never understand the burden he carried every single day. They got to live on carefree, never worrying when they would be fed,
Whoa.
sleeping in a warm
What the
bed after a
fuck?
delicious home-cooked
How?
meal from a
How
mother
can
who
that be?
showered them in love.
I was
The
in
boy's
bathroom.
hands clenched the bark of the tree
He
trunk
shot
as small
that poor
grooves
girl.
began to form in the wood.
I held up
His
my
jewel-colored
hand.
pupils becoming darker
And
as his
then
mood
I was
soured.
back here.
They never needed to worry about anything. Always running around with those
I
disgusting
already
smiles
heard this
adorned on their
lecture.
faces. The wood that Na held began to creak quietly before eventually just snapping in
Kate is
half,
being hassled
showering
again.
him with fragments of wood and dust.
And if
He paid
Victoria's
it no
phone
mind.
rings,
This world, it
This
would
is
know
real.
pain. It would understand
Shit.
suffering.
Can
It
you
would.
give me an example of a
Naruto.
photographer?
The
I cannot
voice of his
believe
best
this.
friend
Capture the
caused
human
his
condition in
previously
black and
sour
white.
mood to swivel on a
okay,
dime.
if I'm crazy,
His aggravated
I might
visage
as well go
shifting
all the way.
drastically as a small smile formed on
can
his
I
face.
actually reverse time?
His violet orb
Korea?
glanced downwards as he
Arbus?
spotted the Yamanaka
Because of her
bouncing on her
images of
heels.
hopeless faces.
She
You
looked
feel
like an
totally
excited
haunted by
puppy
the-
as her hair bounced from her erratic movements. How
better
was she
rewind.
always able to find him? It was incredibly strange to him. He could have chosen any location in the village to sit and stew in his anger and the girl would still somehow
I
find
did
him.
it.
It's
I
like the girl
actually
was
did it.
aware of his
Photographer
presence
who
at all
perfectly
times.
captured the
Human
human
time
As if they were
machine.
connected somehow. Destiny perhaps.
Anybody?
The young blonde mentally shook his head at the thought,
Max,
pondering the
don't freak
meaningless
out.
existence of
Not
fate
yet.
and destiny would do him no good.
Why Arbus?
If gods like fate and
Because of her
destiny did
together
truly
faces.
exist, then
You
why
feel
does
like
the
totally
world
haunted
suffer
by
so
the eyes
much?
of those sad mothers.
Why
I
do
took my
children
selfie,
suffer in
Jefferson
silence
asked
at
me
the
a
hands of
question.
their parents?
If he
Why do
does
men
again,
and women
I'll
needlessly
notice this
throw
for
their
real.
lives away?
Keep that
Nah,
to yourself.
we're going to be late.
Seriously,
Mommy and
though,
Daddy are
I could
showing
frame
up to the
any one of you in a
evaluation.
dark corner
The Gingariki
and
sighed
capture you
lowly
in
to
a moment of
himself as
desperation.
Enos' words shook him from his
And any one of
thoughts.
you could do that.
The
If anybody
mid-year
else looked at
evaluation.
this,
That
what
was
would they
today,
think?
wasn't it? Why did they have to do it anyway? None of the civilian children could even hold a candle to the clan children. It was a waste of time. The academy hasn't even started proper training for the usage of chakra in combat. These civilian children would get absolutely demolished. Na scoffed in annoyance before jumping off the tree. He landed without a sound as Eno's face immediately filled his vision. Come on, we're going to be LAAAT. The girl grasped his right hand with her left and instantly took off in a full sprint. The girl's platinum blonde hair trailing behind her as several strands whipped out towards his face. The blonde rolled his eyes with a smile as she began to declare how she would crush everybody else. It was definitely cute. She'd most certainly crush the civilian children with both hands behind her back, but she'd struggle against some of the stronger clan children, namely himself and Sasake. We don't need to run Anakin. Yes, we do. Na resigned himself to the torture his best friend was putting him through. Running to the academy just meant that he'd reach it sooner. He didn't enjoy the classes, the teachers, and disliked nearly every other child in the room. Sure, he never really went, but that didn't change the fact that he received the memories of his clones when they went. The other students were loud and possessed the intelligence of a rock. Just the thought of being surrounded by them annoyed him. The two children continued their pace for another 5 minutes before reaching the academy. Na could make out a rather large group of shinobi that were standing near the area where the students would usually spar with another. He could make out most of the clan heirs and Ares' parents within the crowd. A small smirk formed on his face as he and Eno reached the practice grounds. His mismatched pupils glanced around the area as he spotted several children from his class standing with their parents. Would he truly try with this evaluation? He could, but that'd be too easy, and he didn't necessarily care for the bragging rights of being Rookie of the Year. It was a useless title and proved very little. On the other hand, Na shook his head at the thought. There was no positive in this. It was a waste of time. He didn't care for anyone's opinion but his own. And Enos's. It didn't help that he didn't want to be a shinobi in the first place. Well, that's not technically true. Na did want to be a shinobi, just not a Konoha shinobi. He hated this village and mostly everyone in it. Why would he ever want to protect these people? They'd sooner throw him to their enemies if it meant they'd survive. He would make sure that they suffered. He'd make them all suffer. A small smile formed on the boy's face as Eno dragged him towards her parents.
To me.
His violet orb analyzing
Isn't
both
that
of
too
them.
easy?
They were genuinely
Too
kind
obvious?
people. He had never
What if
actually
Arbus
expected
chose to
anyone in
capture
this
people at
village
the
to do
height
anything for
of
him.
their beauty or
They
innocence?
had allowed him to spend days,
She had a
weeks even
brilliant
at their
eye.
home.
So,
They put food in
She
his
could have
stomach
taken
and
another
treated him
approach.
like a human.
I have
He
to
didn't
admit,
wish to hurt
I'm
these
not a
ones.
big fan of her
They'd
work.
be safe.
Still the same
His
stupid
darker
picture.
emotions must have been
So
radiating
everything
because
seems
Sierra
the same as
immediately
before.
gazed at him in concern.
he captured
Is
the essence
everything
of
all right,
post-war beat in America.
Naruto? Saya
the
truly
same
was a
stupid
saint of a
picture.
woman. If there were more people
Everything
like her
seemed
in
the
this
same as
world,
before.
then maybe he would
don't
have
have
been a
beauty
more
without a
optimistic
beat.
individual.
Which
But
explains
of
why
course,
Frank was
one
Kerouac's
good person does not make up for the thousands of
template
sins
is
that
still
others
in the
commit
same
every
place.
single day.
1950s. Well,
His quest would
we've
continue.
all seen
It had
that
to.
iconic
Naruto
shot of
Uzumaki
Kerouac
was
on the
someone who
balcony.
would shape the
And if you
future of
haven't,
the world.
shame.
He'd be its
Capturing
savior
the
or he'd be
romantic
its
earth
end. I'm okay, pretty lady.
and
I just
solitude of
want
the
to go
20th century
home.
poet.
He refused to look in her eyes.
You dig?
They'd be full of compassion, and he didn't need to be filled with guilt for his future decisions. She was the mother he never had. His body tensed up as the woman's hand raised his spiky locks. His resolve wavered for all but a second, but he refused to speak or acknowledge the woman's gentle touch. Stay away. Na closed his eyes as his face contorted into a visage of frustration. That voice, it was always invading his thoughts. Never resting, never leaving, speaking, yelling. Even now, it was like a whirlwind of anger and rage swirling in his head. The screams of agony and despair were like nails on a chalkboard. That hateful cloud of anger wrapping around his soul and twisting his very person. He couldn't escape. The voice was screaming now. Loud, 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 louder, louder. Shut up. Naruto's hands gripped his head as he doubled over in pain. He released a grunt of pain as he fell to his knees while clenching his eyes shut. He clawed at the sides of his skull as he tried to alleviate the pain from within his mind. A burst of chakra exploded out from his position as he began to scream into the sky. A hateful miasma began to pulse out from the boy as his body became encased in a shroud of crimson chakra.
Now,
The crowd of shinobi and children immediately began to scatter away from the Gingari, who continued to scream in anguish. Before Ino could rush to her friend,
I can't
she was held in
stretch time
place by
anymore.
one of the many academy teachers within the area. Saya, hold him still. I'm going to force him
Anybody?
to sleep. Eniki was at the boy's side without another word as Sia tried to prevent the boy from thrashing around on the ground.
anybody?
Her knees dug into the soil as the
Bueller?
boy's legs shot out at her.
Arbus.
She
There
grit
you
her
go,
teeth as the
Victoria.
red chakra
Why
emanating
Arbus?
from his body began to
Because
burn
of her
her.
images of hopeless
Nah,
faces.
calm
You
down.
feel like totally
Stop.
haunted by the eyes
Stop
of those
moving.
sad
We're
mothers and
trying to
children.
help you. The woman grunted in pain as she struggled to hold the boy down while Inoki began to run through several hand seals.
Anybody?
His hands became encased in green
Bueller?
chakra as he immediately
Diane
placed his
Arbus.
palm on the
There
boy's
you go,
forehead.
Victoria.
The effect
Why
was
Arbus?
almost instantaneous
Because
as the
of her
boy's
images of
body went
hopeless
completely
faces.
slack. His eyes rolled into the back of his head before shutting. Saya
You feel like
grimaced
totally
as she
haunted.
glanced down at some of the scratches on her arm. A bit of blood dripped down her forearms as she released a sigh of relief. Ino broke free from her restraint as she slid in the dirt next to her friend. She grasped the boy's hand in hers as her eyes became misty. Mommy, is he going to be okay? Saya glanced at her husband as several jonin began to direct the parents and children out of the area. She spotted several Anbu members touching down around him as Inoki sighed to himself. I don't know, sweetie. The woman began to gently clean the blood off of her arms as she reached for the boy's mask. Na is a special case in the village. The young Yamanaka didn't respond to the statement as she ran her thumb over the boy's hand. A tear slid down her face as she gripped his hand tightly. Break. Naruto's eyes snapped open as he inhaled sharply, his body snapping upwards in response to awakening so suddenly. He could feel his heartbeat running a mile a second as he tried to calm his breathing. His mismatched orbs snapping to and fro as he tried to locate any sources of danger. Several minutes passed in silence as he began to calm his rapidly beating heart. He was able to finally analyze his surroundings, and once he did, where am I? Na glanced around his surroundings in muted shock as he tried to understand exactly what was happening. Was he floating? Were those clouds? He blinked several times as his hands touched the ground. A small frown appeared on his face as his hands met resistance. He glanced around the area before spotting his mask
That was
resting
so
several meters
surreal.
in front of him.
Film little
The blonde
pieces
child
of
rose
time.
to his feet as he slowly
But he
strode
could be
forward
talking
to
about
retrieve his
photography,
mask.
as he likely
The
was.
closer
Okay.
he got to his
I'm in
mask,
class.
the darker his
Everything's
surroundings
cool.
became. The
I'm
clouds
okay.
around him were now pulsating as if
To
they were
shadows.
alive.
From
The
color
blonde marched
to
on as the
chiaroscuro.
clouds began to rumble loudly.
Now,
The sound of
can you
thunder
give me an
booming almost
example of a
made him jump as
photographer who
lightning began
perfectly
to crash
captured the
down
human
around
condition in
him.
I
black and
didn't
white?
fall
Na
asleep.
stopped in his
and
quest as he slowly
that sure
tilted his
didn't
head
feel like a
towards the
dream.
sky. A
Bueller?
single
Weird.
raindrop landed on his
Arbus.
cheek before several
There you
more
go,
crashes
Victoria.
of thunder rang
Why
out.
Arbus?
2 drops,
Because of her
3,
images of
4.
hopeless faces.
The rain
You
began
feel
to
like
fall
totally haunted
faster
by
as
the eyes
another
of those
strike of
sad
lightning
mothers and
touched
children.
down. his
She
body
saw
becoming
humanity as
drenched as he
tortured, right?
glanced back at his mask.
And frankly, it's
This
bullshit.
feeling, it was sad. A frown
Keep that to
formed on the
yourself.
Gingariki's face as he
Seriously,
began
though,
to truly
I
get a
could frame
feel
any
for his
one of you in a dark
surroundings.
corner
So
and
many
capture you
depressing
in a moment
emotions
of
were bombarding
desperation.
him as he wiped his face
And any
clean
one of
from the
you could
liquid
do that to
assaulting
me.
him. Sadness, anguish,
Isn't that too
regret.
easy?
Na powered through
Too
the onslaught
obvious?
of negative emotions as he
What if-
continued
Look at
to
this
make his
crap.
way towards his
How can I
mask.
show this to Mr.
Once
Jefferson?
reaching the object, he tilted
hear
his
the
head in
class laughing
confusion
at
as
me
he
now.
noticed how damaged the object was. His mask had never been like this.
Arbus
He
chose to
studied the
capture
object
people
and
at the
noticed
height
several
of their
things about
beauty
it that
or
made him
innocence.
frown.
She
The
had a
left eye
brilliant
hole
eye.
Plus,
sported
it's
several
perfect for me to
cracks
have to
around
get
it
my
with
daily
one of the
selfie
ears
quota.
missing. The bottom half
I
of the
have to
mask was
admit,
completely
I'm not a
missing
big
with
fan of
several
her
jagged
work.
shards pointing downwards,
prefer
almost a
Robert Frank.
as if it had been blown
Me
off.
too, Victoria.
The mask was covered in dirt and
captured the
sported
essence of
several red
post-war
stains.
beat America.
Looking closer,
And there was-
he identified
I
the
believe
stains
Max
as
has
blood.
taken what you
A
kids
large
call
frown
a
formed on his
selfie.
face as he
A
slowly
dumb
reached
word
for the
a
object.
wonderful photographic
Once
tradition.
his fingers wrapped
And
around
Max
the object,
has a
a
gift.
large flash of bright light
Of
surrounded
course,
him.
as you all know,
He
the
immediately
photo
shut his
portrait has
eyes with a
been
yelp
popular
as he
since
braced
the
his
early
body for
1800s.
danger.
Your
Na rubbed
generation
his
was
eyes
not
to
the first to
alleviate
use
his
them just
momentary
for
blindness before the
selfie
smell of
expression.
smoke entered his nostril.
Sorry.
The boy
I couldn't
opened his
resist.
eyes and was once
The point
again shocked
remains
into
that the
silence.
portraiture has
It
always
was
been a vital
devastation.
aspect of art
What was
and
once no
photography
doubt a
for
village was
as
now
long
a
as it's been
smoldering
around.
crater full of ash and death.
Now,
Several
Max,
structures were charred and
since you've
destroyed,
captured our interest
leaving
and
only
clearly wanna
remnants
join
of
the
what was once a
conversation, can you
neighborhood.
please
He glanced
tell us the
around
name
the
of
area
process
and
that
spotted
gave
several
birth to the
buildings and
first
landmarks that were torn
self-portraits?
under. The fires still raging despite the sheer
I
amount
did
of ash
know,
raining from the
But I
sky.
kind of
The
forgot.
Gingariki glanced
You either
around
know
his
this
surroundings
or
as a
not,
small
Max.
flash of
Is
movement
there
caught his
anybody here who
attention.
knows their
He
stuff?
strained his
Louis
vision as he
Daguerre was a
spotted
French
what
painter
appeared
who
to be a figure
created
standing atop a
daguerreotypes,
mountain.
a process
A
that
mountain
gave
that
portraits
looked
a
very
sharp
familiar.
reflective style
A
like
small
mirror.
frown formed
Now
on
you're
his face
totally
before he
stepping in
immediately
retro
ran
zone.
towards the
Sad
mountain.
face.
He weaved in and out of the
Very good,
debris of
Victoria.
several buildings as he
The
spotted
Daguerrean
several
process
bodies laying
brought out fine
motionlessly.
detail in people's
The stench
faces,
of death and
making them
burning flesh
extremely
assaulted
popular
his
from the
nostrils
1800s
as he
onward.
cringed lightly.
The first American
Dozens upon
daguerreotype
dozens of dead
self-portrait was
bodies
done by
lay on the
Robert
ground,
Cornelius.
all sporting a very familiar
You can
insignia
find
as
out all
well.
about him
Na
in
ran
your
for several
textbook
minutes
or
before
I haven't
reaching
kept
what
up
he
with my
assumed to
journal
be
as
the
much as I
Hokage
should.
monument. His mismatched
Hey guys,
pupils
don't forget
landed
the
on the
deadline to
cloaked
submit a photo
individual
in
he
the Everyday
spotted
Heroes
minutes earlier as
contest.
he
I'll fly
slowed
out
to
with
a
the winner to
stop.
San Francisco,
He
where you'll be
glanced down
feted
at
by
the
the art
broken
world.
mask within
Trade
his hand
exposure, and
before
it can
frowning.
kickstart a career in
The
photography.
individual
So
wore a
Stella
black
and Alyssa,
cloak with a
get
hood
it
that
together.
concealed his
Taylor,
upper body.
don't hide.
He wore ebony
Still
pants
waiting
and
for your entry
sported a
too. And
pair
yes,
of
Max,
black boots to
I
match.
see you pretending not to see
The
me.
person wore a pair of fingerless black gloves that ended at the elbow. Red tape was wrapped around the person's boots and gloves. The man gave off a feeling of despair and anger as Naruto began to slowly
Victoria
move
doesn't
forward.
waste a second kissing
Why did this
ass.
seem so familiar to him? Was this one of those
I should have
dreams he
known.
had of toppling
She'll have better
Konoha?
equipment
But it
than
felt
Blackwell.
real, too real. Na got within 10 feet of the man before he was finally acknowledged. The hooded figure rotated his head, if only slightly, behind him. Na was unable to make out any distinctive features, but the feelings of despair only seemed to get worse. No, that wasn't quite right. Na felt more sadness than anything, like a feeling of
course,
permanent
Victoria
defeat
has to
wafting
have
over
the
him and
bestest,
tugging him
newest,
down.
most expensive
As if all
everything.
hope was lost and life had lost its meaning. That's what
I
he
should have
truly
known.
felt from this
She'll have
man.
better equipment than
Miserable,
Blackwell.
isn't it? The voice shook him to his core. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be. Yo, you, it's you. Na stood ramrod straight as the figure slowly lowered the hood covering their head. A man of spiky black hair was released from its confines as the man began to slowly turn around. Na took a step back in shock at the man who was staring back at him. It was him, the man he'd see in his dreams. He was the voice, a face not unlike his own, stared back at him with apathy. 3 jagged whisker marks adorned on his face with a set of mismatched orbs, one violet and one blue. The only thing he was lacking was blonde hair and a mask. Na glanced down at the destroyed mask in his hands before staring back at himself. I don't understand. Who are you? Who am I? What is this? The man ignored the questions before slowly turning around and staring it out at the destroyed ville. Lager of Konoha. His arms crossed against his chest before speaking. You are Naruto Uzumaki. Na furrowed his eyebrows in confusion before gesturing with his hands in frustration. That doesn't make any sense. Why do I have dreams about you then? Why are you always speaking? Answer me. The older doppelganger was silent for several moments before gesturing with his head. Na stared at the man for several moments before slowly and cautiously making his way towards the man. The sheer sadness radiating off the man was palpable. The younger blonde could barely even stomach it. Na stepped beside the taller man as he stared up at the man in frustration. Here was the man who had influenced all of his darker emotions. The man who would whisper incessantly to him day in and day out, filling his soul with the anger of 1,000 men. Why wasn't he talking? Speak now. Na swore he saw a ghost of a smirk appear on the man's visage. It disappeared just as quickly as it appeared, and it made Na question whether or not it actually happened. You asked who you are. I told you. You are Naruto Uzumaki. Naruto sighed in annoyance before staring out at the destroyed
What do you
village.
truly want to
Mimicking
do
the
when you
man,
grow up?
he crossed his arms against his chest before sighing lowly.
What about you?
He needed to calm
Travel.
down. Frustration would get him
awesome.
nowhere. If this
Explore
person
the
was him,
world,
then he
go
needed to
far
approach
from
this
here.
situation differently.
Far
Am
from
I
me?
truly
Thanks a
Naruto
lot,
Uzumaki?
dude.
I do not feel
Dude, you
like
would
him.
totally come
If I
with
didn't
me.
know better,
I need
I'd
a
say you were
bodyguard for our
Naruto Uzumaki.
adventures.
Naruto
I
was
would be
able
like
to catch
Lara
the smirk
Croft,
that formed
except
on the
real.
man's face.
That would be majorly
It didn't
cool.
disappear this time and
Totally.
remained. You
We
were
have
learning.
cars and
I
boats
play
and
the
planes
games.
all
I do
over
not
for
get play.
instant escape.
He shot back instantly.
adults
The
can tell
smirk
us
on the
what to
man's
do.
face only grew at the words
me
being
in.
spoken.
What would you do
Na
while I was
narrowed his eyes
bodyguarding you?
before glancing at the mask
Maybe
in his
take
hand.
pictures of our adventures.
He was silent for
I
several
would
seconds
love to be
before
a
tossing it
photographer.
towards the man who caught
As
it
if
without
I ever
looking
could
before
be.
placing it against his
What are you
face.
talking about?
What's your actual
Max,
name?
you're a
Now you're
photographer.
asking the
Your
correct
pictures could be in a
questions.
museum.
His tone was one of amusement,
Someday they
but
will.
Na ignored the bait.
I
He
believe
wanted
you.
answers, and he was going to get them. I am Naruto Uzumaki. Naruto's violet orb glowed with anger as he snarled. You lie just like I do. Stop playing games. The black-haired man smiled beneath his mask before replying. But I am Naruto Uzumaki. I'm just not you. Mismatched orbs narrowed to slits as the blonde child stared at the ashes of Konoha. He wasn't going to get anything straightforward. Was this how others felt when speaking to him? It was annoying. This is a waste of time. You have thousands of things to say every day, but when in person, you remain silent. Send me back home. You can play your games alone. That seemed to cause a reaction as the man glanced towards his younger counterpart. His mismatched pupils bore into the blonde as both males stared directly at one another. I am you, but I am not you. You do not believe in the gods, but I do. Your anger is my anger. Your eyes are my eyes. My anguish is your hatred. We are one in the same. Different lives, but similar circumstances. The words only served to confuse Naruto even more. What did any of that even mean? I was not born as Naruto, but I am indeed him. You do not understand, but you will one day. The ebony-haired man glanced down the mountain as the world around them blurred. Na felt his body turn upside down before the world became clear again. The feeling of anguish now assaulting his very core. Tears began to fall and he was powerless to stop them. We carry the same burden. We all do. The man gestured with his hand as he directed Naruto's attention towards the large cage that sat in front of them. Na wiped his face clean as he stared into the pitch-black darkness of the Kyuubi's cell. He was quiet for several moments as he stared into the water that pulled around his ankles. A demon is what they call me. They
love
say
that
that
they
I
have
will
the
bring
same old
ruin to
answering
Konoha
machine.
and that I'm a monster.
And there's
They
a
say that to
message.
all of us. The world around them blurred once
should
more
be
as the
able to
feeling
find
of
the tools I
sadness
need
grew
here.
even stronger. The area surrounding the duo was not unlike the first one, with the remains of a destroyed Konoha being
No
presented.
password.
The only
Like it would
difference
help me
being the
find tools
incredibly
anyway.
large crowd of shinobi and villagers cheering and singing, the feeling of despair and sadness contrasting heavily with the
These are
scene in
way
front
too
of
big.
them.
I need
The
tiny
younger
tools for
blonde
that
tilted
camera.
his head in confusion as he stared at another version of himself. This Na was being held up by the very villagers who had damned him, cheering his name and singing praises as they cried in happiness. A familiar Yamanaka stared at the boy with a loving smile as she darted through the crowd towards the blonde hero with mismatched
Chloe's
pupils.
stepfather is this
Once she
asshole
reached
from
the blonde
Blackwell.
teen, she pulled him into a
You've
loving
gotta be
embrace
shitting
before
me.
mashing their lips together. What is this? The younger blonde stared
Chloe's
at the
stepdad
scene
is
in
head of
front of him
security
with
at Blackwell.
confusion. We all
wants to
walk
put
different
surveillance
paths.
cameras all
What
over
you're
the
seeing is
school?
another you. One who did not succumb to his
Nothing.
hatred and
This is
instead
so
gained power
lame.
from the love and support of his friends. The younger blonde frowned at the scene as he removed his mask from his face. He held the porcelain material in his hands as a small frown formed on his face. You succumb to your hatred. The older Naruto frowned before
all that
glancing
food.
down at his hands.
That's like enough
He was
spam
silent for
100
several moments
years.
before the scene around them blurred once more. No. I succumb to my grief. The younger blonde stared at the scene in front of him
Check
with a
out
heavy
the muscle
frown.
car.
What he was seeing
Chloe's
made his
stepdad
anger
must be a
skyrocket.
gearhead.
The two Naruto stared at the scene in front of them as a version of Ino was splayed out in the dirt with blood pooling from her body. She had several broken bones with deep lacerations covering her entire body,
Cool,
showing the
now it's
telltale
opened.
signs of having been tortured. Her teal eyes were staring blankly into the sky as rain pelted her mutilated body. The two Narutos heard an enraged scream as they spotted a black-haired Naruto who was being restrained by several dozen Konoha shinobi. Nah, stop. You risk war with Kumo. They will slaughter us. She died a shinobi's death. The black-haired
Poor little
Na broke
dear.
free from his
It's not
restraints
enough to
before
kill
killing
you,
his
they have
fellow
to display
shinobi
your
in a blind
head.
rage. The man continued his merciless onslaught as anything in his path was destroyed and rendered to ashes. The scene around them changed once again as they were now overlooking a conversation between the cages of Suna, Konoha, Iwa, and Kiri. The black-haired Naruto appeared in the room before declaring war on the four major villages and killing Courage's cage. Ino's death was the breaking point. She was a pacifist in my world, a gentle soul who could never truly harm another. She became a shinobi because she wanted to help others. She used to say, those with power should use it to better the world. To make it safe for the next generation of children, Mayo wasn't a true shinobi. Gentle and soft-spoken, she was captured by a Kumo squad
wonder
while on a
what's in those
simple
files
escort
up there.
mission. They tortured her until she couldn't take any more.
Shit!
They butchered her before sending her
Butterfingers.
dead body back to Konoha. I killed every single person in that village, hunted them down to even
Kate
the last
Marsh.
child.
Why the
None
hell
were
would he
spared
have
from my
pictures of
wrath.
her?
After killing each
Okay,
and
this
every
is
one of
getting
Kumo's
totally
residents,
weird.
I turned my anger on the world. I became a monster. The younger blonde stared at the ground as he listened to his counterpart relive that very moment in his life.
What the?
What did you do
Chloe's
afterwards?
stepdad
The
actually
scene
installed
blurred once
cameras in
again
the
before
rooms?
settling back on the
For
destroyed
reals?
Konoha.
This
The
guy
black-haired
has
Naruto
serious
had
trust
Ino's
issues.
corpse in his arms as
Do
he
Chloe
screamed
and
into
Joyce
the
even know
sky.
about this?
For several minutes, he screamed before taking a kunai and slitting his own throat. I killed myself, so blinded by my grief and anger that I failed to realize that what I truly wanted was to be with my sunflower again. I toppled the 5 hidden villages by myself. And in my final moments was where I realized that vengeance was empty. The only woman to ever love me unconditionally was taken from me.
Wowzer, a map
So
of
I did the
Blackwell
same to
Academy.
everyone else. The
wonder
world
why.
around them blurred once again before settling on a pitch-black room that lacked any form of light. The younger blonde glanced around his surroundings before frowning and speaking. I want to hear your reason. The older Naruto glanced down at his counterpart before placing his mask against his face and crossing his arms. His body began to slowly deteriorate before he began to speak. To give you a perspective on who exactly Naruto Uzumaki is and potentially can be. What you saw today was two sides of the same coin. Naruto Uzumaki can be a savior or he can be a destroyer. You believe I will succumb to my hatred? The older Naruto scoffed before replying. You already have. My words and dreams to you were warnings. I tried to sway your beliefs. This path will not bring you happiness. Your subconscious plays tricks on you. I'm stuck with you and I refuse to do this same song and dance. After saying his piece, the older Naruto dissipated from the room as the younger blonde stared at his mask. His visage shifted through several emotions
That
before
took
settling
Chloe
on
and me the whole
frustration.
day to
He
draw.
dropped to his knees as his fists
It's
clenched
almost
tightly.
invisible now.
He immediately struck the ground with his fist as he screamed out in frustration. Damn it. So guys, what do you think about
made
this
this grave
Naruto
for
story?
Chloe's kitty.
Tell me your opinion
Poor
in the
Longo.
comments. And if you
He
want
never
more
saw that
Naruto
car
What If
coming.
stories, make sure to
Chloe
subscribe
used
to
to grill
Universe of
awesome
Naruto.
burgers for us.
Thanks for watching.